Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories podcast. I am your host for today, John DeLynn. It is July 15th, 2022, and I am joined today in studio as co-host, my dear, beloved, sweet partner, amazing, brilliant, beautiful partner, Margie DeLynn. Hey, Margie.
Hey, Vape, how are you?
You're co-hosting today. How cool is that?
I know. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. Jen's out of town, and Margie, as many of you know, Margie's been leading kind of this Thrive series where she's exploring healing and growth after high demand religion. Many of you love that Thrive series, but we also want Margie to be able to co-host from time to time in just a regular old, amazing, epic Mormon stories faith journey interview, and that's what today is going to be. Anything you want to add to that, Margie?
Oh, just that I'm really, really happy to be here for today's story.
Yeah. All right. Well, as just kind of like an introduction, preview, today we are interviewing Ali Christiansen. Is that right?
Yeah.
Hey, Ali.
Hey.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And just to give a tiny bit of background, as we were nearing kind of the March-April timeframe of this year in 2022, there were a lot of people emailing or messaging me about kind of the issue of being a BYU student and losing your faith while being a BYU student, but not being able to talk about it publicly out of fear of some sort of repercussion. Particularly BYU has been known in the past to kind of like hold up someone's graduation, even kind of expel them from the university if they talk about their loss of faith in a way that really can negatively impact their ability to graduate and to graduate on time, sometimes setting them back 2 years worth of like study and financially. So it's a real serious problem that at BYU, if you lose your faith in Catholicism and join Mormonism as a BYU student, you're fine. But if you're a believing Mormon while a BYU student and then you lose your faith, you can literally be expelled and kicked out. And it's a real problem. But we also really believe in covering all topics that are really germane and important in the Mormon experience. And the BYU experience is a really important Mormon experience. And in fact, it's one of the reasons I'm super glad Margie's here, because Margie and I met at BYU, right, sweetie?
We sure did.
Yeah. So we're both BYU alums, and we had faith challenges while at BYU, so we know a little bit about this issue, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep,
Yeah,
absolutely.
So Ali's story is going to be epic for a lot of reasons, but we're definitely going to be covering the issue of losing your faith while at BYU. Ali, you graduated from BYU just a couple months ago. Is that right?
Well, that was my plan, was to graduate a couple months ago. So it would have been, like spring of 2022. But it ended up not happening. And I graduated a year ago.
Yeah.
So I kind of had to, guess we'll get into that later.
Okay.
Cut things short. And so I sort of am a recent graduate, but not actually.
Okay. When was the last time you attended BYU?
The last time I attended, I graduated April 2021.
Okay.
But I have been on campus recently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is all still really recent and relatively recent in your life.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of really other cool, important, valuable themes that we're going to be exploring today. We're going to be exploring, of course, a little bit of Ali's pioneer ancestry, some trauma that happened in Ali's family, particularly relating to her grandparents, her grandfather, and a little bit of a content warning that we're going to be talking about death, life and death a little bit in this episode. We're going to be talking about growing up in rural Utah, in this case, Delta. Is that right?
Well, I actually grew up in Leamington.
Okay.
But most people don't know where that is. So.
Yeah. But growing up as a member of the LDS Church in rural Utah, right? Yeah. But then also serving a mission, relatively recent, mission as an LDS woman. And then, being at BYU. One of the things that's interesting about Ali as well is that Ali is a singer. She's moving away soon to go to graduate school as a performer, but she sang with the BYU's, what's the choir?
BYU Singers.
BYU Singers, which is the most elite choir. She sung with the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. She's sung at LDS General Conference. She's even performed solos at BYU assemblies where all the students were there. So kind of an professional opera level singer performer. And we're going to be covering kind of what that was like, both for you as a believer, but then also how that became complicated as you were questioning your faith a little bit, right? We'll be talking about that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And then there is a theme of asexuality that we'll be covering kind of once we get to the kind of courtship marriage part of Ali's story, which is always an important thing when people feel like it's an important part of their identity to be covering. Any other major themes that we want to give people a preview about before we jump in?
I guess also I'll want to talk about like perfectionism and mental health.
Yeah.
As well.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's probably everyone's Mormon story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's common.
Definitely mine.
It's common for sure. Beautiful. Okay. Well, should we dig in? Should we jump in? Margie, anything else you want to say at the beginning before we start?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Oh, I guess, can I give like a reasons why I want to do this interview?
Perfect. Let's start with your intention.
So my intention, first of all, is like, I don't intend to hurt anyone or offend anyone. And I'm going to be as kind as I can. I would also like to be honest with like how I feel now and how I've kind of felt throughout my life. I think that's really important.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess I'll try to, I'll try to be careful about like names that I say, I don't want to get anyone in trouble, but yeah, that's about it.
Yeah. Like a lot of times if you just tell your story, family members or friends are going to just claim that you're trying to take away people's faith or that you're trying to destroy the church. And I think, tell me if I'm wrong, what I'm hearing you saying is that's not what you're about here.
Yeah. I guess. Thank you for that. That's helpful. What I want to do is I want to help kind of the Utah / just church culture in general be more aware of ways that it is unintentionally, I think, hurting people. And then also I really think BYU has a lot that's going really well, but I think they also have a lot of policies and kind of cultural things too that hurt a lot of people. Yeah, and I think if there could be some changes made there, a lot of people would be so much better off. Like even the most devout, believing students and faculty, I think, would be way better off too. So,
yeah, because like not only many BYU students, more and more by 2022, are having to deal with a loss of faith while being a BYU student. It significantly impacts their mental and even physical health and their relationships, but also BYU faculty and staff. We know that there are many, many, many BYU faculty and staff that are dealing with all this, and there has to be a more humane way for the Mormon Church to allow people to have a waxing and a waning, or even a conversion to the Mormon faith, or a complete elimination of the Mormon faith without it jeopardizing your academic career, your occupational career, your financial situation. There's got to be a better way.
Yeah, it's just, you can't get the support you need if you can't talk about your feelings, right? So if we could just make it safe for people to share their inner lives without being afraid of losing everything, I think that would be a really great first step. So
yeah, beautiful. Well, let's jump in then. Ali, thanks for being willing to come, because I know it It's nerve-wracking at best, but it can also impact relationships. And so we honor that and we acknowledge it. And we really appreciate your willingness to be vulnerable and to tell your story. So where does your Mormon story begin?
So I wanted to start before I come around with a little bit of my family history, because I think, I came from the people before me. And there are a couple people that I specifically wanted to mention first on my dad's side. So my dad is Finlayson. Finlayson is my maiden name. And what the first Finlayson on that side to kind of join the church was George Finlayson. He was in England in 1830s kind of. And when the missionaries came over, then he was married to his wife and they had one child. And this is the story as it was told to me growing up. So maybe it's a little bit wrong. Maybe I'm not remembering everything right, but this is kind of what was part of my understanding of myself as as a young Mormon child. So he believed, he kind of was converted, but his wife was not, and they couldn't reconcile it. So he just left his little family in England and moved to Utah and started over. So from the very beginning, the faith was so important. It's you have to give up everything. And that's kind of that's the one of the examples I had in my family.
So faith over family is
Yeah.
kind of how your Mormon pioneer ancestry begins.
Yeah. Yeah. And then another kind of, I think, relevant story too is the first LDS bishop was Edward Partridge. Some people may already know that. He was my great grandfather. And so he was baptized by Parley Pratt in New York. And then it turns out that 3 of Edward Partridge's daughters were polygamist wives to an apostle early in the church. And they all kind of were in the towns around Leamington area where I grew up. So everyone there is my cousins because we all just have this built-in polygamy family. And so I kind of already knew about polygamy all growing up and did I thought it was kind of weird nowadays, but it was never a surprise for me to learn about it because it was part of my family history.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Part of your story from the
Part
beginning.
of my story.
And can you tell people where that generally is in Utah, that town? Leamington?
Leamington. So it's central western kind of Utah.
So near Delta.
Yeah.
How
It's
far away from Delta?
It's 20 miles away.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a town of 300 people, and there's a church in the town and houses and not much else.
Okay.
Everyone there just, you hang out at church on Sunday. And that's
Is it a farming town?
Yeah, you live there either as there's a cement plant that some people work at, or people are farmers, or they work at the coal power plant in Delta.
Yeah. Is it dairy? Is dairy a common?
There's a lot of dairies in Delta. There aren't any in Leamington, mostly alfalfa, corn in Leamington. So those smells are really, I really like smelling alfalfa. It reminds me of home.
Yeah. Okay, beautiful. All right. So where do you want to go next with your Mormon story?
So then next, I kind of wanted to talk about a little bit about my mom's family. And I would like to kind of respect her privacy, so I won't go too much into this, but I'll just say her mom was not her mom. I think also had pioneer ancestry, but herself was kind of inactive, and she married a man who wasn't LDS, and they had a pretty troubled marriage. My mom had kind of a hard life growing up.
In Leamington or?
No, this was in New Mexico.
New Mexico. Okay.
Yeah. So my mom was always kind of looking for something to bring peace and structure into her life. Mm-hmm. Actually, when she didn't go to church very much, but she was kind of befriended by the young woman leaders in her area when she was like 14. She started going, and she's told me at one point the BYU Young Ambassadors toured to her high school. Ooh, I still like feel emotional telling this because it feels really powerful. Um, and they sang "Let There Be Peace on Earth," and I remember like hearing her tell the story when I was little, thinking how special it was that she could feel like the spirit testifying to her in that moment. That was a really powerful experience for her. So she ended up getting baptized. And none of her other siblings ever joined the church, but she was always really, really faithful. And so she worked really hard and was able to go to BYU, married my dad there. And my dad, has this kind of strong pioneer ancestry too. So she's always been, I would think, kind of the rock of faith in my family. Yeah, and there's also already like, a little bit of BYU's music kind of playing a role in my life before I'm even there.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And the power of music, it sounds like too, right?
Yeah.
Mm.
Was your mom a singer?
No.
Okay.
No, she always liked, doing music and things, but she never had the opportunity. Yeah, and so then my parents were at BYU, and then, got their degrees done, started having kids, got a house in California, and then I actually have never really been told the whole story because I think it's just too painful for my mom to talk about, but her father killed her mother. And so
your grandfather killed your grandmother.
yeah. And it was, that was obviously a really hard thing for my mom. And she still doesn't really talk about it. And I think like that's kind of given her the sense of how important it is to have the gospel and like to have family strength and safety. So she was always very careful about, making sure we were all safe and loved. And because of this like kind of background, she has always been a very faithful, devoted woman. Yeah.
That's hard.
Heartbreaking.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Thank you. So, yeah, I guess I'll kind of start with myself now. So I was like born in California, but we moved to Utah when I was like 5. So I pretty much have grown up in Utah my whole life. There were a few, let's see. I wanted to talk a little bit about some stuff about primary.
Yeah.
So I remember like enjoying primary and really taking it seriously. I think I was kind of more spiritually like careful and inclined than probably most kids were at that age. I know you like to talk about like what were your favorite songs, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that. So, like I remember the song "If You Chance to See a Frown, Do Not Let It Stay. Turn that frown right upside down and smile that frown away." So that song is like really ingrained into my psyche. It was kind of one of the first lessons where I learned like, oh, it's important to be happy for other people. Like for me to be like a good little sunbeam and like a good little Mormon girl, it's my job to be happy and not be a burden on others, because if I'm like frowning, that's like not what Jesus wants.
Mhm.
So I kind of started internalizing then, like it's important to be happy and not ever sad or mad. Another one.
Instead of like, if you chance to meet a frown, embrace your sadness and feel it. That wasn't
definitely
the message of
no.
it.
Yeah.
Process it, talk to a mental health professional.
Don't know that song.
No.
Not familiar.
And then another one that kind of like comes to mind is I'm a Child of God. I really liked singing that one, because it was so pretty. But as I kind of like have realized, like it says, teach me all that I must do to live with him someday. And I also really was aware of like how conditional that was. Like I need to learn well and like do everything right now so that I like it all does work out in the end. So I was really serious about like always making sure I was doing the right thing.
Such a good point.
Yeah. And then one like kind of Sunday school lesson I remember from primary as well was learning about Jesus and how he was perfect and how when we made mistakes, he had to suffer for that. And by then I had kind of learned, besides just like hitting your siblings or like cheating on a test, to me it felt like even if I was sad, that was a sin. Or if I got to read my scriptures, that was a sin. And I kind of took it on myself to think, well, I'll just not make mistakes. I'll just be like Jesus now. And then I won't. I won't hurt him, but I won't disappoint him. So that's the kind of kid I was. I was very careful and I didn't want to hurt anyone. And I was doing the best that I could. But, I did feel bad whenever I did slip up.
Yeah. This idea of having someone else hurt, suffer for us being human.
It's a lot for a child to deal with. It's a big responsibility.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people relate to that.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing.
So let's see. I also wanted to talk about a little bit about my family dynamics too. Then, so my dad's mother was a pianist, and she taught kind of everyone in the town how to play. So I was really excited to turn 8, partly because I got to get baptized, but also because that's when I got to start taking piano lessons. And all my, my older siblings were playing, and I was super jealous of them because it was so cool. So I was really excited when I got to start learning, and when I did start music lessons, it was hard, but it was fun. And I also in my family, I kind of had the role as there's like a little saying in my family, I'm not really sure where it came from, but like that the fourth kid is like the perfect easy child. Because my dad was the fourth in his family and my mom was the fourth in her family, and they were both kind of just like easygoing, like kind of did well. I remember hearing my grandma tell that to me, and my parents would tell that to me, like, oh, you're just like the easy one who just like does things right. So that was really important to me too, that I had kind of that role to live up to, and it felt really good.
To be the easy child?
Mm-hmm.
And you were the fourth?
Yeah, I was the fourth.
Okay.
Yeah.
You were the fourth out of how many?
Out of 6.
Out of 6.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we were pretty spread out. The oldest is like 16 years apart from the youngest. So I got my turn of being the youngest before, like 4 years later, I got a little brother, and then I got a turn to kind of be the older sister too, but definitely got a lot of the younger sister kind of super girly, getting all the dolls and stuff. Yeah.
Well,
So a lot of expectations, a lot of pressure
yeah.
to keep your emotions in check, to not cause anyone sadness, and to kind of be as perfect as you can be from a very young age.
Yeah. And I really thought that was realistic. Like, I thought it seemed like people around me were doing it, and it felt like I was doing pretty good doing it. Yeah.
it's interesting when we talk about the roles we play in our family systems and the terms that are used, this idea of being an easy child, or it's so based on a parent's experience, what's easy for a parent as opposed to a child being able to just sort of be a child. But really, don't you think this idea of easy really translates into like, I have no needs.
Yeah. Yeah. I was very good at not asking for a lot of help and kind of proactively looking out for people around me who needed help, because that's what Jesus did. Was always looking for a way to be helpful. I really liked general conference talks that talked about that. It helped me feel like I was doing the right thing and on my way, When I was finally old enough to leave primary and go to Young Women's, I was really excited because I was so sick of primary and feeling like, I was pretty over it. I think a lot of people can relate. So when I was a Beehive, which is when you're 12 to like 13, for those, I guess, who are not familiar, I was never in the class presidency. And I kind of noticed, like, the people who are, they seem like they get more attention. They seem a little bit more righteous. And I was kind of jealous. And I felt like it was important for me to make sure it happened after that. And sure enough, I learned kind of like what ways you need to act, how you need to be involved and volunteer to help with things, be super involved at girls' camp, etc. And I was able to land the Maya Maid and Laurel presidency spots. But I was figuring out, like, this is the Mormon hierarchy, if you will. This is what you need to do. This is who you need to be successful.
Yeah, the game plan.
Yeah.
Conform, comply, obey, serve.
Yeah.
Mold yourself to what you perceive the church wants out of a young girl.
Yeah. And
so it's less about developing your own authentic identity and more about becoming who you think the church wants you to become.
For sure. Like the hymn, I'll be what you want me to be. It's like, it's never like about what am I interested in? What do I want to do with my life? Because it's so easy to make a mistake. It's much safer to figure out, what does God want? What do people around me, what are they saying? And how do I just kind of glean information from that and do it myself? Yeah. So I guess I was really good at kind of mimicking, being kind of a chameleon both in my life goals as well as my interactions with other people.
Can I ask you a question about that? Like, at this point in time, how is that feeling for you to do that? Is it feeling like a lot of effort? Is it feeling like a lot of pressure? Is it feeling like you're getting positively reinforced and it actually feels good? Like, what's your experience at this point in life?
In the chronology.
In the chronology, that's right. So kind of young women's age, as you're starting to figure it out, and then you're landing the presidency positions in your?
I think I honestly thought it felt really good. I maybe was a little lonely, but I don't think I really recognized that or kind of accepted it. And I really it was hard for me to feel within myself that I was like worthy. Um, and this way I could kind of have like, if I had tick off all these boxes, like I know that I'm loved and I can like feel God's love. But if I'm not doing something, like I felt less than. Yeah. So it was really working for me. I really was quite committed. And I guess like even then I was very like sure in my testimony. I never had a time where I didn't really like some people when they're young, they're like, I need to like read the Book of Mormon and get the feeling. But like I kind of had that all the time. Felt like, except for when I was sad or whatever, and I was like, oh no, I need to hurry and do something to get the spirit back, which usually a way to serve was good, or like listening to nice music or reading the scriptures, all the primary answers. I was really good at those.
So anytime you experience positive emotion, it was often reinforcement from the church of you conforming to the identity they wanted you to conform to.
Yeah.
And if any point you were sad, the way to fix the sadness was to just hustle more by serving the church and doing what the church wanted.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure, I think it was Elder Bednar, right, who said, like, the way to know if a good feeling is from God is if it's a good feeling, it's from God, right? I think that I don't think he gave that talk till I was in high school, but that mindset really resonated with me. It's like anything good is from God. Any good idea that I have, do it because it's from God. And if I feel sad or upset, that's like Satan, and I like don't want that in my life. Yeah.
Yeah. And if your emotions are all functioning the way that they quote should, that's maybe okay. But I guess you're grimacing a little bit at that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think there are just many levels of ways that we are conditioned, right? To when we disconnect from ourselves and we kind of self-betray and meaning, we give of ourselves to get the love we want, which we all do.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's just there are many ways that we are conditioned to do that. And so in that way, even when it's working, is it really working? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I can say I did have sort of one outlet, which was journaling. Because, they talked a lot about how important it was to journal to leave a record for your ancestors, posterity. So when I was like 8, I was already getting pretty good at writing in my journal every day. And, sometimes I would say like, oh, I feel a little bit sad about this. I did try to write every day, like a spiritual experience, because I wanted my journal to be like a really positive thing for my family to read, later on when I was dead or whatever. But I did have a bit of that outlet, which I think was really helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, like a private self, a little bit, like a place where you could kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess also kind of that age, when I was 11, I started going to ward choir with my dad. The rule in our family was you had to do it when you were 12, but I thought, well, I might as well go now because it's cool. All the cool. I just wanted as many opportunities as I could really to be involved with music. So, and I wasn't in high school yet. My older sisters were like doing the musicals and having a blast, and I was not able to do that. So at least I could do ward choir, and all the people there really liked having a young person who could sing high without, you know, running out of steam. So that was really fun. And a lot of those songs are really burned into my brain forever. I'll never forget them. Yeah.
I love performing in word choir as a youth and as a young adult. That brought me just a lot of positive joy and positive emotion and fulfillment.
Yeah.
And so was singing in your family part of your kind of family culture too? It sounds like this idea of like everyone participates when you turn 12, that is like a, you know, is that true? And is that, did you always love singing? Is that something you remember even as a child, or was it something that kind of?
Yeah. As a kid, like, I really liked going to primary and getting to do the singing stuff. That was probably my favorite part of primary. And I was always advocating for like good music and girls camp and young women's. My family, we're all kind of more private, not internal people. What's the word for that?
Intrinsic versus extrinsic,
no.
introvert versus
Introvert. There you go.
extrovert?
Introvert. We're all a little bit more introverted, so we don't like just like sit around and sing all the time, you know? We do have a bit of a tradition of sometimes like sitting at the piano and singing like Beatles songs together.
That's the right band. If you're going to sing a band, that's the right one.
Yeah. I know how to sing some Beatles songs because of that, although probably not the right style. Yeah, I think mostly my parents knew that it was helpful, like later on in your church career, if you had a lot of musical training. So they wanted us all to have that, and they want us to have the option to pursue it later on. But if you don't do it when you're young, it's kind of like harder to get in. So I think they just really wanted us to have the opportunity, and they both enjoy music as well. Yeah. So yeah, kind of going with the music, when I was still about that age, I was looking forward to getting my patriarchal blessing. Do I need to explain what that is?
Yeah, I think we have a lot of never Mormons who listen.
Yeah.
So yeah, just a brief explanation of what that meant to you at the time, maybe.
So a patriarchal blessing is, there is usually a old retired gentleman in your area who his calling is to be the stake patriarch, and he will basically, everyone can go meet with him and get, laying on of hands, a special blessing, like directly from God about, the way I kind of saw it was like, you read scriptures about other people's lives, but a patriarchal blessing is like God giving you your own scriptures for like what to do in your own life. And they talk a lot about it when you're a youth, about how you need like this roadmap to help you, know what to do with your life. And we've kind of talked about, I really like having people tell me what to do. And I was kind of unsure of what I should be doing with my life as I was getting a little bit older. So I was really excited to get my patriarchal blessing. And when I did, it was like, really, it felt in the moment, I remember it felt like super peaceful. I remember feeling a lot of love. I remember I cried, I think like the whole time. I cry a lot. And it felt like very individual and specific for me. And one highlight in there is it did talk about how I should keep pursuing music. And I kind of felt like that was my go-ahead from Heavenly Father to be like, I guess even though maybe normally it wouldn't be smart to pursue music, at least that's kind of how I felt. Like it's not likely to be a good career. Since God told me I could do it, then I went ahead and like kept pursuing music. So that was a really formative moment for me. Also at this age, my oldest sister had gotten into BYU, and she was singing in the BYU choirs, and I went to the first concert that I had been to before. I went to many more as my older siblings went through BYU, and as I went. But I remembered sitting in the De Young concert hall in BYU campus. I think we were up on the kind of the loft part, the second story, and hearing the students sing. And it was so beautiful. And I felt almost transported. It felt heavenly. It felt like kind of the closest I had ever felt to God. And I remember thinking, if I can do anything in my life, it would be so special to do this. So that kind of became a goal for me, was, you know, besides that my parents had gone to BYU and it's kind of the expectation that we were going to go there, I wanted for myself to go there and be able to be part of that music and have that experience with myself, but also share that with other people and help them feel so close to God too.
And when you receive that patriarchal blessing, it's almost as if God, I mean, from the mindset of a believing Mormon, it's almost as if God is blessing your career as a musician.
Right.
Like your destiny or his will is that you bless people's lives through music for the goodness of the gospel. Is that fair?
Yeah. So I had 100% faith that it would work out because, you know, that was my calling. I was supposed to do that.
Yeah.
And maybe it doesn't happen for everyone, but I thought it might happen for me.
Yeah.
Then I guess before I get into like high school, one more thing. My parents both had kind of co-occurring illnesses at the same time that were pretty serious. My mom was a pregnancy that was really hard. And then my dad had sort of like a infection that got bad and turned into a heart thing, and he ended up having to have surgery while my mom was, you know, down for a pregnancy that was really hard. And at the time, I didn't recognize it. Now I can kind of see like I wasn't getting enough support because my parents couldn't do it. And I didn't know that I needed help, but I did. So I started acting out a little bit socially. And again, for privacy, like I won't really go into it because it's not really my story to tell. But there was like an incident that happened that I felt like anytime before when I had made a mistake, it was like, well, it's still okay. But this time it felt like, oh, I really messed up. And I can kind of see that as a point in my life where I really doubled down and thought, I can't be selfish. I need to just look out for other people and take care of them and be the best that I can, because even I could slip up and I'm not good enough yet. I need to try harder. So that's kind of like me going into high school, was with that mindset of I need to be really dedicated. I need to be there for people around me. I need to be as holy as I can.
Kind of double down, hyper vigilant.
Yeah.
Because you can cause others or Heavenly Father sadness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So high school, I kind of look back on it and I almost don't even know how I survived because I was so busy. And at the time it felt like really cool. Like I felt very proud of my busyness. I felt like pretty hot stuff. Besides the fact that I also felt kind of terrible about myself, you know, that kind of weird, like, I feel like I'm a really good example, but also I'm like kind of terrible. So like I need to be really extra hard working. So
What's the high school? Is it Leamington High School or
Delta High School?
Delta
yeah,
High
Leamington
School.
did not have a school.
Okay.
We had to bus.
Okay.
Yeah.
Delta High. Okay.
Yeah.
Still a small high school relative. Do you know like 1A, 2A, 3A?
My graduating class was, I think, 330 people.
Okay.
So we were a 2A.
Okay.
Yeah. Or maybe, I think we were 3A, but we were the smallest 3A school.
Okay.
And we were 3A because the sports there were super, super, like, sports are the most important thing about Delta High School, not, I would think, so much the education. Maybe it's gotten better since I left. I would hope so. So they had to have our school be 3A because we were too tough for the 2A schools. But yeah. So some examples of how I kind of now think it's a little bit insane, but at the time it felt like pretty good. I took the ACT 13 times while I was in high school because I knew I just needed to get a high enough score that I would get a scholarship into BYU because that's where I needed to go. So when I was a freshman, I took it, and I just took it once or twice a year, and then kind of took it more and more often as I got closer to graduating. And I just took it until I got the score I needed, and then I could stop. Yeah.
I've never heard of taking it that many times personally.
Yeah. I have never heard of that either.
I mean, 5 or 6 times would have been perceived as a lot. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if you know what Sterling Scholar is.
Yeah. Not to flex, one of our daughters was a Sterling Scholar. So,
yeah. So I guess if you're not like in Utah, I don't think this is like a normal thing. There's kind of a competition for high schoolers who are graduating, seniors, and they have different categories of like areas that you can be good at things. And
so like science or
science, music, chemistry, or not chemistry, math, art,
social studies.
Yeah. And all my older siblings did it, but my second oldest sister was the General Sterling Scholar. And that's the most prestigious one because that means you're good at everything. And they kind of all learned how to like do all these extracurricular activities so that you have a really good portfolio for the end of the year when you're judged against all the other school representatives. So I knew going into high school, I wanted to be the General Sterling Scholar. And I also wanted to be the valedictorian just because I also didn't want to not ever get straight A's.
Of your high school, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I wouldn't really know how to cope with that, making mistakes. So I went and I made a list of all the things that I did. I know it's not complete, but it's hard for me to remember all the things I was involved in. So let me just share a little bit of how much I was doing in high school. So I was in band, which was kind of a big commitment itself because if you were in band, you were in concert band, and then you were in marching band, which did games like football games and then basketball games. And then we had a new band teacher, which was super fun. He was fresh from his grad school. And so we started getting really big into competitions. So we had like summer marching band, just marching band all year. And then we had concert band all year, which was a class, pep band. And then I would also occasionally solo with the orchestra because I played the oboe and they sometimes need an oboist. And I did jazz band and played the piano with them my last year. Then I was also in a local clogging dance team, which was super fun. I love clogging. I did it a little bit at BYU. Never on the team though, but I loved it. If you don't know what clogging is, it's kind of like tap dancing, but you like are stomping and jumping around more. So it's like a really good cardio. I did the musicals every fall, and plus one time they did this spring musical instead of a spring play, which was super cool. So I did those too, and those were always like before or after school rehearsals.
Were you ever lead or just supporting or?
I was the lead. My senior year, I was Seitel in Fiddler on the Roof. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. That was fun. Yeah. I love high school musicals. Everyone should do them if you get the chance because it's so fun. Then I did private voice and piano lessons. And at that point, I was starting to think like I'm going to be studying. I hadn't decided then that I was going to sing. I was kind of trying to decide, do I want to sing? Do I want to do oboe or do I want to do piano? And my second oldest sister was at BYU doing a double major in piano performance and math. So I started taking lessons from her BYU professor, piano lessons. And then I was also starting to take voice lessons with, people up in like Salt Lake, Springville, which is a bit of a drive, but not as many opportunities in Delta. And so I would do the competitions for that solo and ensemble every spring. There was a woman in our ward who taught art lessons because she had an art degree. So I would do that every Wednesday after school, kind of hang out with kids. I was also kind of in charge of a little bit babysitting the group there, but it was really fun. I really loved having time to do like crafty things. I started some 4-H clubs for kids, doing various things. Even at one point I was like teaching Lego robotics, which I didn't really know anything about. So I don't really know how that happened, but I ended up doing that. I got involved with American Legion. Of course, I was doing all of the church activities. So there was mutual every week. I was on the math team, so I do those competitions. I was on the chemistry team, although I don't think we ever got our teacher organized enough for us to compete. And I worked at an after-school care center for kids, and I did cross-country and track. And I was also in the student government when I was a senior. So anyway, I kept myself busy.
Trying to be the every girl, basically.
Yeah. Well, because I knew if I wanted to win the General Sterling Scholar thing, I needed to have a lot of stuff in my portfolio. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what it was for, was just all for a resume. And a lot of the things, when I graduated, I kind of felt a little empty inside. Like, a lot of my friends had a lot of, romantic experiences, or had spent a lot of more time hanging out with our peers, and I didn't do that as much, and I felt like I'd missed out. Yeah.
So kind of high achievement.
Yeah.
And a little less time for connecting in relationships during that time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So when I graduated, that was one thing that I realized I kind of wanted to try doing different, was a little more time for people. Yeah.
Yeah, I relate to that. I mean, I know Margie, you were a state level cross country and track runner, and grades were important to you. So I'm guessing you can relate to some of this. And then me, yeah, I was going for the equivalent in Texas. And so it was like on every committee and doing all the things. So because of that, plus seminary, for me, it was early morning seminary. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering, did you feel a lot of pressure, anxiety? Was it healthy? Was it actually good for you because you were just accomplishing a lot and feeling good about your accomplishments? Mm-hmm. How did all that impact your mental health?
I was kind of unaware at the time how like worn out I was getting. I know there are some people who, like don't even sleep at all in high school. I did get some sleep. But I could fall asleep. I could take a nap anywhere. Mm-hmm. I was always tired. Yeah. And I was always really stressed. I would think at the time I probably would have, if I had been, I could have been diagnosed with an anxiety disorder at the time.
You would have met criteria.
Yeah. But I didn't, there was no room in my idea of who I was supposed to be for not being okay. So I was just like, yeah, I'm fine. I'm great. But I was getting pretty worn down.
Do you think you got a sense that your worth was tied to your performance?
For sure. Yeah. If I ever, let's see, there were probably a few times where I had like a close call and like maybe not scoring high enough on a test that maybe like it was possible my grade would not be an A. And those were always like really panicky, and I would get as much extra credit done as possible because it was like too dangerous to conceive of myself like not doing well. Yeah. There was also, I really liked seminary. In fact, one of the seminary teachers was my second cousin. because everyone there is,
because you were all
we're all
connected.
related. It was so fun. Everyone's your cousins.
This would have been Release Time Seminary, where they integrated Mormon LDS Church religious instruction into your high school schedule.
Yeah.
So you would like leave campus, walk across the street or whatever to the seminary building and learn about the Book of Mormon as like third period.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, yeah.
Which is a weird distortion, merging of church and state within Utah and Idaho and Arizona, some of these really highly Mormon populated areas. It still blows my mind that this is allowed, but that was your experience.
Yeah, it was. And I was always as involved as I could be in seminary. I got to the point, they would give us a little like notebook to take notes in. And I usually had to like staple 2 or 3 together to fit all my notes for the whole year, because I like to take tons of notes and always like, have be the scripture mastery chase winner, which is like, if they ask you what scripture it is, you like find it as fast as you can, raise your hand. Yeah. It was a really good system of getting a lot of external validation, which is what felt good at the time. But there was one thing with seminary. So when I was a senior, or like, I guess the end of my junior year, when I had decided I was going to run for student government, it was kind of close and I almost didn't make it, in fact, but I ended up making it in, which felt kind of unreal. I hadn't really expected to get in, because I wasn't like a popular kid per se, but I guess I don't know. I made it in somehow. And then one of the seminary teachers pulled me aside. I'm pretty sure it was the guy who was my cousin. So we were a little bit closer, and the brother, I guess I should say. And he told me that he would have put me as a seminary president, but since I was going to be in the student government, I would be too busy and I wouldn't be able to do it. And I remember feeling like pretty crushed. It's like, oh no, did I put worldly success before like the most important thing, which is like serving God? And I remember feeling really conflicted about that. But at that point, I didn't want to back out of my role in student government. Like, it had already happened. But my cousin, we were both kind of similar in our overachievementness. Different cousin. She was in my same grade. She ended up being in the seminary presidency, and I remember feeling like, I'm not sure if jealous was the right thing, but I felt very like conscious of maybe she was more righteous than I was at that point. I felt sensitive about that.
Yeah. So that was a time, it sounds like, where, let's just say the outcome wasn't it, like you weren't able to optimize, right? It feels like you were able to kind of control a lot through your high school, through effort, just like through hustle.
Yeah.
Right? And this was a time, and it sounds like you didn't know about it. Like when you went for the student body government or whatever, that type of, you didn't actually know that was going to jeopardize that was a decision that was made after. Is that right?
Right.
Okay.
If I'm remembering correctly, I might have dramatized it in my memory, but.
So other than that, I'm curious, was there any other time in high school that you felt a sense of loss, or you were not able to optimize to get the results you wanted through your sort of work ethic, commitment, this type of kind of always hustling? Was there any other time? Or for the most part, was your experience like, I can control my experience through my level of effort? If I try hard enough, if I work hard enough, right, I can be optimal. I can get.
There's a couple things I can think of. So one was just actually kind of my experience with like the choral and musical part of high school. So, there's always like people making a big stink about not getting the lead when they feel like they should. And that was kind of my experience too. Starting in high school as I progressed through high school, I started to feel a little more serious about singing. And I was realizing like, I don't really love to sit at the piano and practice for 5 hours. And I haven't had enough like I never got professional oboe lessons. So it didn't seem like it was going to be a very easy option to just like graduate and go right into music doing oboe. So I was starting to think like, maybe I'll sing. Maybe I'll want to see if I can sing at BYU as my major. But the choral program was not very big. So kind of my only opportunities were with the musicals, but it was, Mormon, Utah, everybody is a singer. And I also, for all that I was very good at doing lots of things, I was not very enigmatic or like lively, and I wasn't very comfortable actually like performing still. And there were other students who were more naturally gifted at that. So I kind of felt like, even though I'm like taking this time to take these lessons and like practicing all the time, it never really felt like the singing really worked out. So I was kind of in the back of my mind thinking, well, maybe it'll be different. I'll just go to BYU and everything will work out. But there was a small part of me that thought, well, maybe it's just me. Like, maybe I'm not good enough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. So actually the singing part was a little more uncertain.
Yeah.
During your time in high school.
Yeah. And then actually the Sterling Scholar thing is kind of the best example of hustling not doing it for me. Because I ended up in the competition. I did not win. I was a runner-up. And I was so surprised because I felt like I had done an impossible amount of things for years, and I had even done things that I really hated doing that were so exhausting because I felt like I had to so I could win this thing. And then when it didn't happen, it was honestly devastating and so confusing to realize like you can do everything you can and it might not be good enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Do you remember the process of that? Was there a lot of grief and a lot of kind of reckoning around that and the time you spent, or were you kind of off to the next things, right? Because that's the thing about doing and hustling.
Yeah, I definitely didn't even really let myself acknowledge, even in the moment, that I was disappointed. I was, I can remember being on the stage and hearing my name called as a runner-up and being like, it was just shock in my whole body. And then, like put on a smile, go up, shake someone's hand, then go sit down. And then kind of just like sitting in like that weirdness after finding out. But I just, from that moment on, just kind of pretended it was okay.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that you were supposed to like feel your feelings.
Yeah.
At that point.
Yep.
Yeah. Also, I was like a junior when they did the mission age change. So my graduating class was the first group of like the high school boys. They were the first ones to graduate and just go right on their missions. And I remember that was super exciting. All of my friends were going. Had a really strong in the gospel group of friends. We were good at kind of doing lots of all the dances. We'd like go on group dates together. So when I was graduating, everyone was going on missions, and I had just found out that like chasing after worldly pleasures or whatever was like all for naught. So I realized like, okay, well, I made it into BYU. Yeah, I made it to BYU. So I was like, I need to change my priorities. I need to put spiritual things first, and I need to put people first. And that was, I guess, how I dealt with that. It's like, oh, this was just not for me. And this was maybe bad to put so much into that, and I need to try something else.
Yes, that makes total sense. That type of framing moving forward.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're getting to BYU.
Yeah, let's do. But overall, did you have a sense of accomplishment? Like it was a successful, because like I'm always torn to see the good and the bad of my Mormon upbringing, because I see a lot of good in it. And then I meet a lot of people that experience a lot of harm. And sometimes Margie is like, John, I don't think you realize the ways that it could have harmed you.
Mm-hmm.
But like I'm seeing I'm imagining an observer watching this is like, oh, well, Allie, you were singing, you were performing, you learned a musical instrument, you got great grades, you had the time of your life, you're performing lead in the musicals, and now you're getting into a Division I top-notch university.
Mm-hmm.
Like, sounds like a pretty good deal overall, right?
I mean, that is how it felt. It felt amazing. But I think, I did get a lot of general, like, good experiences. I was, through my high school and middle school experience, able to get into BYU, which is harder and harder every year for students in Utah because so many people want to go. So I was really grateful for that. You hear a lot of stories of people who do so much and they want so badly to like get into BYU and they don't, and it's just completely devastating. So I felt really lucky and grateful, but at the same time, I felt like I had let Heavenly Father down. Yeah.
By
I didn't have a way to understand my failure other than that I had done something wrong or that it wasn't supposed to happen. So, maybe I had not had enough, I hadn't prioritized church enough, although I don't know how I could have possibly prioritized it more. I was super careful about at least ticking off all the boxes of the things we were supposed to do, reading scriptures and going to church and participating in everything. So either like I had sinned and it was a punishment that I hadn't done it, or it just wasn't supposed to be and I was supposed to be doing something else, in which case I probably should have been doing the other thing the whole time, And I guess there's also probably a little bit of internalized misogyny there. I think as a woman, when you try to achieve and it doesn't work out, it's easy to think, oh, I was just stepping out of my place.
You were wanting too much, or
too ambitious.
Yeah.
So maybe Heavenly Father put you in your place for wanting too much.
Well, I don't think I thought that like as an actual thought, but it kind of felt that way. More, I guess, not that I was put in my place, but that maybe my spiritual sight was redirected so I could see, oh, I tried to like have it all and it didn't work out, and it was so draining and overwhelming. It was like, oh, I learned my lesson and I'm going to BYU so I can just like really drill the gospel.
Yeah, it's like shift away from that sort of sterling scholar type mindset. And now it's like all things spiritual. What about my spiritual self and my, is that right?
Yeah, actually, I had from the beginning of my BYU experience, I thought I'm going to allow myself to like, I'm going to accept that I'm probably not going to have straight A's here, for example, because I knew for one thing, BYU was very different from Delta High School. But I also thought it's not the most important thing anymore. Like, I've made it here, and now I need to start being, the woman of faith that I was meant to be.
I have a couple questions for you. Is that okay? Before we move on to BYU?
Yeah.
Okay, really quickly. I was curious. You had mentioned a little bit about your relationships in high school. Did you date, and was it mostly like group dances, or what did your social life look like?
Yeah. Cool question. Thanks for asking. Well, I was so busy with all this stuff, and I didn't live like in town with everyone. So it was even just hard to like have time to meet with people. And if we did meet up, it was like a 20-hour drive, and like teenagers don't have money for gas, it's like just trying to make it through high school. Right. So I was pretty good. Mostly I relied on my friends for like organizing stuff. And I think a lot of my socializing came from like hanging out at band practice, like freezing together in the morning when our fingers are falling off, or marching sets on the football field, or hanging out during play practice, waiting for it to be our turn to go on stage. Most of my socializing came from all the activities I was in. And then I was also kind of, I think like my girlfriends in middle school, they kind of did the job of reaching out to different guys and bringing in, like their crushes or whatever. Excuse me. And so we kind of ended up having a nice little like group of teenagers that we were all friends with. And I never really got into the drama of like single dating. I also was very strict about like following the law of chastity and being super modest. And I knew you were not supposed to date anyone until you were like at least 16. But I was like, I should just wait till I'm at BYU because I need to focus on school and, do what I need to do. So I never really dated anyone in high school. But we would, once you're 16, you're old enough for church rules, start going on dates and group dates and going to dances. So usually, every couple months there's another dance in high school, and I'd go with my friends, and we'd usually have a group date at someone's house and like eat dinner that we cooked or their parents cooked, and do some silly games, and then like go to the dance and have some good wholesome Mormon dancing.
Woot woot.
Yeah. And then I was kind of the friend who other friends would come to talk to me about their drama, and I'd be like, wow, that really sucks. I'm sorry you have to go through that. Like, also a little bit like not quite clicking. Like, I wonder why this doesn't happen to me, but like, whatever. I don't have time to deal with it anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That makes sense. That's great.
Did you follow that weird Utah rule that you can never go with the same boy to 2 or more dances or dates?
Yeah.
You want to talk about that? Because that's just a weird quirky
Well, so it's just, it can't be 2 in a row. So, like when your best friend is like kind of dating this guy, but if you go on 2 dates in a row with someone, it means you're like steady dating, right? Or you're just dating is what we would have said. But like my parents' generation would call it maybe steady dating. And you weren't really supposed to do that, especially because in a year or 2, like the guys were supposed to be able to be detached enough to go on their mission. And if you're too close, sometimes people don't go on their mission because they just want to get married. So we're all like very primed and educated that we don't want to do that. So we kind of just would have a system of like, okay, well, they're dating right now, so like he's gonna ask her out to go, and they'll kind of go, and we'll all just kind of as a group like sort through so that everyone is following the rules. Yeah, and it felt, I don't know, it felt pretty normal. Maybe it sounds weird to other people, but that was just life.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then one last question was just around a little bit of your family culture, if you don't mind.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea, I feel like I have a really good sense for your drive and your kind of internal, let's just say, determination toward perfection,
Mm-hmm.
right? within yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I was just curious what your family culture was like, and also, you know, how your parents related to you around achievement
Mm-hmm.
and excellence.
Yeah. That's a good question. So the first thing that comes to mind is, well, my parents, they both really valued like education and logic. So while like church was important, they both had, like, my dad had an engineering master's degree and undergrad from BYU, and my mom did chemistry as her undergrad and master's degree. And before she had too many children, she used to teach at a community college chemistry. So it was kind of expected to have feet in both things, you know, like have your kind of musical, spiritual side, but also like be educated, be intelligent, be rational. And my parents also, it was really important for my dad that we were able to kind of take care of ourselves. His parents grew up in the Great Depression. And they had like kind of money struggles because they were, you know, poor rural Utah family. So when he went to BYU, it was really important for him to like get a degree that would earn well, right? So he became an engineer, and that really suits his personality too. I think he really loves his job. And so and then my mom did that too. And she didn't end up, you know, having to fall back on her degree because, you know, everything worked out. But she still, you know, would talk, like you could talk to her about chemistry right now if you want to, although I don't remember enough to have a good conversation about it anymore. So that's kind of happening. Also my dad every year would have personal, like maybe like a personal priesthood interview, you could call it, or like an interview with your dad. And he had a journal notebook where he would keep track of our goals. And every year before school, we'd go through and say like, okay, these were all my goals last year. And then we'd tell him like, okay, these are all my goals this year. So I would like with my dad write out, you know, this year, so I'm preparing for all of these things that I want to do and when I'm a senior, when I'm at BYU. So I need to make sure I take these classes, get A's in all these things. And we would set goals with like education, health, social, spiritual, mental. Yeah. So, yeah, it was kind of.
Yeah, you had it on a lot of
driven.
levels, right?
Yeah.
A lot of structural support for kind of achievement, excellence, would you say?
Yes.
Sounds like
yes. Although I actually should have talked about this sooner, so I'm glad I'm talking about it now. There was also a dynamic of kind of a little bit of discord spiritually in my family. Because my dad, early in my parents' marriage, had a bit of a faith crisis. And I didn't really, you know, when I was growing up, I never asked him about it because it felt like pretty bad and taboo. But I knew he didn't go to the temple, and I knew he didn't pay tithing, which like really ate away at me to know that about my dad. And I remember when I was, you know, middle school, high school, one time he was driving me home from something and he had some sort of podcast on that was talking anti-Mormon lies about Joseph Smith. And I'm not sure if he just like didn't realize I was like there listening, or if he was trying to like give me some sort of exposure, maybe give me an opportunity to say something, but I just felt so betrayed and so upset. And that is one of the times that I can remember like feeling furious when I was growing up. I was so, I don't think I've ever told him this. I haven't told him about this yet. I was so mad that he would jeopardize his family like that. He would I was like, well, it's one thing to like maybe have a hard time believing, but like to actively hurt your faith is like unacceptable. So, you know, like my family, we would always pray before dinner, but we didn't always do family home evening. We didn't really do family scripture study. So I kind of did all that just by myself. And my dad, he would give us priesthood blessings at the beginning of the school year. But I don't know, there was just a bit of a disconnect there, and we didn't really talk about it because it's not something you talk about. And I could tell my mom felt a little bit lonely in her faith, you know, when she would go with all of my dad's siblings and their spouses to family temple trips. She would just go by herself. And I thought, like, that was really hard for her. And I knew I needed to marry someone who was as awesome as my dad, but also, like, would stay strong. Because I saw how hard that was for my mom. Yeah. And how hard it was for me.
Do you have a sense for what podcast, do you know now what podcast he was listening to at the time?
I don't think he listens to this podcast.
I was just curious what
So I
it
don't
might have
know.
been.
I don't know what it was.
And you've never asked him what he might have been listening to at the time?
I think I did one time ask him, but he wasn't sure. He did also have like sometimes ex-Mormon Reddit was up on the family desktop computer in the kitchen. And I would kind of give it the evil eye and like close it if I could. And then there were also like Mormon Sunstone journals always around, but I never touched them. Yeah.
You never even touched them.
That would have made you unclean.
Yeah.
So what year was your dad experiencing this faith crisis approximately?
They got married in like 85, I think. So it would have been around like 85 to 87 kind of. And he's still like pretty happily attends church and still like
To this day?
Yeah, to this day. Even if my mom's not there, he like will go by himself. It's like I think his whole family is still really engaged, and it's like the only community really in our little town. So I think he's come to a sort of peace with his membership, but when I was growing up, it was not enough for me. I was a little bit sore about that.
So his faith crisis would have started around the time you were born, you're saying?
It was before I was born.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you would have seen traces of it as you were
Yeah.
into your high school years.
Yeah. As I was growing up, you know, there were just little things like I said, that would show up, or, you know, kind of like he would read a magazine during sacrament meetings sometimes, or, you know.
Yeah.
Not as engaged as I was.
Okay.
Not diligently taking notes.
And do you ever remember through high school saying, "Hey, Dad, your faith doesn't seem as same as Mom's or as strong as it should be. What's going on there?"
Never talked about it.
What do you think that was?
Probably that's like a very scary thing to talk about. I think I knew at some level, like, if there's something my dad knows that like shook his faith, like I don't want to know it.
You didn't want to know.
I don't want to know.
Yeah.
You know? Because you hear about apostates, you hear about people who left, and you think, like, they say, even the very elect shall be deceived, and I got to protect myself. So, like, it's just too scary to know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how I felt.
Sounds very Mormon to me.
Very self-protective.
Yeah. And probably a bit lonely for your dad to not be on the same page.
Yeah.
with his wife, with the community, but also to not be able to be authentic with his own kids about what he was going through.
When I think back about, I'm a little bit older now, I can kind of think about what his experience must have been like. I can imagine he was terrified to talk to us because, the way that we were raised, like, what if we said, I don't want to know. It's one thing to never have someone ask you, but to try to have a conversation and to be shut off would be so painful, right? And I think he didn't want to upset my mom or upset his family by messing up his kids' faith, right? So, and it seems like there are a lot more resources like nowadays on like what to do in that kind of mixed faith sort of marriage situation. But at the time, I think he didn't know what else to do. So he just didn't say anything. Yeah. Although actually one of my siblings has told me when our family still lived in Ridgecrest in California, he did one Sunday take them to some other churches and say like, you could try other places and you could kind of think about what you believe. So I think he did make that effort once, but for whatever reason it was not consistent.
Mm-hmm.
So BYU?
Yeah. Any other questions, Margie?
Nope. No? Thanks for that.
Yeah. And I just was going to ask, when you said you felt like you had failed, was it because you didn't get Sterling Scholar or was it something else too?
I think not getting Sterling Scholar felt like a pretty big, obvious wound type thing, a very big disappointment. But also just kind of the hollow feeling I had inside when I was graduating. Like, I kind of remember, like I was like, big graduation ceremony, like sitting at the front, like giving my address because I was one of the valedictorians, and talking about like success or goals or something. I don't know what I talked about, but I remember feeling like just kind of a sense of dread inside. Like I did everything that I wanted to do and like maybe some things didn't work out, but here I am. Like this was my dream and it feels so empty. And it just felt off. And yeah, I guess that kind of sense of failure was a little bit deeper than just the Sterling Scholar thing.
Yeah. So you hear about and kind of suicidal ideation and even death by suicide is more and more common these days, and everybody's trying to figure it out in and outside of Mormonism. Not a uniquely Mormon thing. It's kind of a U.S. thing and maybe in some ways a global thing. But you hear about kids that were marginalized or like lonely or experienced trauma, and you hear about that sort of suicidal ideation. But then you hear, and Margie, you've highlighted some of these stories to me about a Stanford runner or a University of Michigan star athlete valedictorian that dies by suicide. And you think, wait a minute, it's one thing for like people that are struggling in life and marginalized, but like why would a star athlete, star student, star performer ever get to the point where they would ever feel that way? Because you would think they would be on top of the world. And so I don't know if you have, I would love to hear if you have any reflections on that. But what I'm hearing is that you felt you had gotten used to feeling good whenever you performed. And so I what I'm hearing is that you, if you felt good, it was almost like a sign that Heavenly Father was pleased from you. So when you got to the end of your high school experience, You were waiting for those positive feelings to come to make you feel endorsed by Heavenly Father as having done a good job. And then when those feelings didn't come, you had only to sort of say, I must have not done it right.
Yeah.
He must have not been pleased with me, or I would be feeling better, which is the risk of tying positive and negative emotions to Heavenly Father, which we started with that because we started with that. And it's like, well, what's wrong with that? Well, it's wrong if your feelings don't behave like you think they should, then it doesn't just mean you're having a bad day or your emotions, maybe you're depressed, maybe you have anxiety, maybe there's some clinical diagnosis here, or maybe you're just, your feelings don't always match what happens in life, which is all of us. But if you encode that as Heavenly Father's disapproval.
Yeah. Well, and I think, I think a lot of us Utah Mormons type people have very terrible emotional hygiene. So like, I think it could have very easily happened where I had all of these experiences and it was a net positive, but I think just because culturally, like within my extended family culture but mostly really just like kind of Utah, we don't really know like what to do with feelings besides kind of numb them out and like busy out. And anytime that method of management gets kind of messed up, you're left with all of the repressed feelings that you have not like kind of done anything with, and it feels like a terrible, terrible mistake.
Yeah.
What are you? It's one thing to like be sad because you're not doing what you're supposed to do, but if you're not happy and you've done everything you're supposed to do to be happy, like what do you do with that? Yeah.
And so from before, it sounds like you just decided to double down spiritually.
Yeah.
And commit to the gospel, the plan of happiness, the LDS Church's plan, and purge your life of any non-spiritual desires. I don't want to put those words in your mouth, but that's what I think I heard you say.
Yeah. Well, and I knew like I still needed to like go to school and stuff, but I realized that shouldn't be my first priority anymore,
Yeah.
So I actually, one good example of this with deciding where to go to school. I mean, it wasn't really a decision, right? I was going to BYU, but I did actually, apply to several other schools in Utah just in case, and I auditioned for UVU's opera program and I got in, and I could have gone as a freshman with a separate just singing scholarship. And BYU, I got into the school, but I did not get into the major that I wanted. I didn't get into the music program. But it wasn't even a choice. Like, I knew I wanted to sing, but I was like, I have to go to BYU. So I turned down UVU and I just went to BYU, and I thought, I'll just try again, I guess, or something. Yeah.
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 Okay.
And I guess actually before I get into my BYU experience, one last thing. My older siblings were at BYU, and in my senior year of high school, I found out that they had both lost their faith. And it was so scary. Because BYU is supposed to be where you go to be safe, right? Like, it's supposed to be the Lord's university, and like nothing bad happens there. And they talked about it with me a little bit, but I like didn't really want to hear, So I heard kind of all the scary stuff that happened with them, almost like getting kicked out of school and, getting in a really bad mental health kind of place because of their experiences. But kind of what I took away from that was I need to be really careful, even while I'm at BYU, for that to not happen to me, because that's just not an option.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? The translation being a little bit like, okay, so it happened to my dad because, these things can happen even, and then when it happens to siblings, then it's like, okay, next layer, it also can happen at BYU. So now we're going to be really, really, happens in general, happened to my dad. We're going to be really careful. Okay, now it's happening to my siblings and at BYU. So now we're going to be even more careful. It's just really, our framing and our psychological armor.
Yeah.
To keep us safe from.
When I went to BYU, I had a lot of like rules kind of that I set for myself. I went to the temple every week to do baptisms, and I made sure every semester I was in a religious class. You couldn't really do institute as in on-campus housing, which I was really mad about because I was like, I should be going to institute. And I always went to the BYU devotionals every Tuesday. I would leave and go watch that. And although I didn't make it into the performance program, I did make it into women's course. So I got a lot of like spiritual nourishment, musical nourishment from those experiences. Yeah.
Really quickly, what year did you enter BYU?
2013.
Okay.
That fall.
So about 9 years ago. Yeah. And that's when your two older siblings would have lost their faith around that time? Okay. That just helps me kind of put it into a timeline.
Yeah.
2013.
Yeah.
Right around the time the gospel topics essays were about to come out.
Yeah.
Right around the time that the CS letter was about to come out. And then right around the time the church started ramping up its excommunications out of fear.
I actually, when I was in my home ward, they told us about the gospel topics essays, and I went home and looked them up, and I was like, okay, now I know. It was like not a big deal at all for me to read them, which is not, I think, everyone's experience, but I was just like, oh, okay, like this is stuff I didn't know, now I know it, so we're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So BYU, my freshman year, I did better at like having friends and hanging out with my roommates, which was a lot of fun. I wasn't really sure what I was doing school-wise because I was not in the major that I thought I was going to be in yet. So I was kind of thinking like, maybe I'll just audition again next year. But I was also like thinking maybe I'll like be a math major like my sister, because they were actually both still at BYU at the time. So I was like sort of taking math classes and just like generals, and then I was in choir, and I think I was in a dance class too, just for fun. And it was just like a year of kind of like settling into like not being with my parents. I think there was a little bit of bouts of like anxiety that I didn't really know what they were, and I was just like, whatever, it's fine. And I loved choir. It was the most amazing thing. I still can like my first semester of the choir songs that we sang, they're all like nice women's choir arrangements of hymns and things. I think I still have most of them memorized because they were like the first ones I did, and they were all so cool. And I was trying to figure out what I was like doing with my life. And I was starting to think, well, I'll just go on a mission because I didn't really feel like I was ready to get married. Dating was kind of scary. Boys are scary. Anytime while I was at that freshman year, a guy started to show interest in me, especially if they were an RM. I like freaked out.
And an RM, for those who aren't Mormon, means
a returned-missionary, which at BYU, if you are a returned-missionary man, it means you're looking for a wife. So, there was, several students, female students in my ward who dated RMs that year and like got married. So you like kind of be careful about that if you don't want that to happen to you.
Were you in the dorms?
Mm-hmm.
Hillman or
Heritage?
Heritage.
Yeah.
So you made your own food.
Yeah. Yeah, I really liked cooking. So I didn't want to live in Helaman.
Yeah.
Um,
And there would have been RMs, returned missionaries in your ward at Heritage?
a few, yeah.
Yeah.
But mostly, well, there were a few. It was like right when all the guys had gone off to missions. So it was like 2 years of guys were kind of gone.
Oh.
So our ward was a little bit like smaller, and there were like some RMs and some who were like about to go on missions. So the focus at that point was definitely more like everyone going on missions. If there were special meetings, it was about missions and like training for a mission, not so much about like marriage yet.
And for those who don't know the history, for, I don't know, 50, 80 years in the LDS Church, men were encouraged to go on missions when they were 19. So if you were a man prior to 2013, you would usually try and go to a BYU school for a year after high school. And then after your freshman year, you would turn in your mission papers and go on a mission. That's what I did. Went on a mission when I was 19. But women weren't allowed to go on missions until they were 21. So usually they would do 2 to 3 years of BYU. And then when they're almost a senior, if they hadn't gotten married yet, then they would consider the possibility of going on a mission.
Mm-hmm.
During Thomas S. Monson's later tenure, he had a revelation that the mission age was going to be lower. What we know now is that the church was running out of that mission. The number of people willing to serve missions was in decline, and the church was starting to see a decline in overall baptisms. And so by lowering the mission, the church was, it was a couple things. The church was not getting the number of young men serving missions that they wanted, and the church realized that it was losing too many young men and sometimes young women between their high school graduation and once they went to college. They would maybe become secular or lose their faith and never serve missions at all. So by lowering the mission age to 18 for young men and to 19 for young women, and the second thing was, instead of making missions kind of like super optional for young women, basically communicating that pretty much all young women should go on missions if they're able. The church was able to kind of like double what was becoming a weakened missionary force. So immediately the number of missionaries went from like 40 or 50,000 globally to like 80 or 90,000 globally. And it caused this real stir within Mormon culture for at least a few years. And it was kind of exciting. I don't know.
It was so exciting.
Yeah.
It felt like, I don't know, we were, we'd all been taught we were the righteous generation. And here we were like ready years before other people to like go on missions and like save the world and like bring the gospel, to everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. So during your freshman year, you started thinking maybe I'm going to go.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
And I had a Book of Mormon professor who was like this really cool brother. And when I got back from my mission, I actually tried to like look him up and like talk to him and say how influential he'd been. But he must have retired or something because I could never find him. But it was kind of on accident that I went into the wrong class. I was supposed to be with a different teacher, but the first day with this professor was so powerful. I was like, I'm meant to be in this class. So I got permission from BYU to switch classes. And he ended up like being it felt like at the time a really positive support for my spirituality and figuring out what I wanted to do. And at one point, like I went into class just like feeling really like overwhelmed, trying to figure out what to do. And after class, he said, I normally don't do this, but would you like a priesthood blessing? And I was just like, yes, I would love a priesthood blessing. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. So we went to his office and he gave me a blessing that felt just as special as like a patriarchal blessing almost. He talked about my unborn children and he talked about my mission and lots of really cool things. And so then I felt like, yeah, okay, this is the right thing for me to do. So I told my parents I wanted to go, and they said, yeah, we'll help you pay for it. Just whatever you have money for, we'll kind of cover the rest. So I put in my papers, was off.
And that's a really complicated part of Mormonism, whether it's your patriarchal blessing or like a father's blessing or a priesthood blessing. The way it's set up in Mormonism, just for those who haven't thought about this or don't know about it, is that somehow men have, through the priesthood, have some sort of privileged access to God that women don't have. So instead of you feeling like, well, I can just talk to God and know what God wants for me and have the confidence that if I'm feeling good about a mission, God will tell me. And if I don't hear from God, then I won't go. You've got a patriarchal blessing that's telling you how your life is going to play out, that's given to you by a man who has the church's best interest in mind when he's giving you the blessing. And it's always going to be like, get married in the temple, have lots of babies, because that's what the church wants for women generally, right? No, you almost never hear about a blessing that's like, don't get married, be a lesbian, and never have kids. You know what I mean? That patriarchal blessing's never happened, right? Ever.
No.
Right? But I'm, you're at BYU trying to figure out what to do, and some man says, let me give you a blessing. And then he's telling you what? He's telling you to do what the church.
Everything about my life. He even told me what my husband's patriarchal blessing said about me. So that was like, and I actually was like able to remember pretty much word for word everything he said. And I went and wrote it down. And then I was like, now I know who I'm supposed to marry. When I'm dating them, I just need to figure out what their patriarchal blessing says. And then if it says this, that means I'm supposed to marry them.
Wow.
Yeah.
And Margie, you're making a little bit of,
Wow.
Your eyes are getting big. Why?
My eyes were like, that's magic.
Well, it's a form of influence.
Mm-hmm.
Some might call it undue influence, but like it's putting you in your place. It's kind of disempowering or invalidating your ability to know what Heavenly Father wants from you. And it's putting a man up there as the one to tell you what God wants for you. Mm-hmm. And at the time, it probably felt amazing. How did it feel?
It was another time where I just like kind of just sobbed and just felt like I was seen by God, when I had this question of like, what am I supposed to do? Should I go on a mission? Is that not for me? Because I know it was encouraged, but they would say, you gotta figure out for yourself. It wasn't like the guys, they had it easy. They just go. I didn't want to mess up God's plan for me. And I felt so confused. It was impossible for me to like have clear feelings about what I wanted. So it felt like, okay, well, this is what God says. And so now I like know what to do. And it felt so comforting. Yeah.
And that's really interesting also with respect to anxiety, because this idea of feeling the discomfort of the unknown and uncertainty, I think that can be very intense. Those feelings can be incredibly intense. And I think, we seek relief oftentimes in those moments in whatever form. You're seeking kind of closure. And so there's that layer too of just sort of like, whew, I was in uncertainty, but okay, now it's known. I've got the answer and I can go. And I think that can be deeply, deeply problematic as, coming to think about life working that way, as opposed to actually what to expect is in life. It is actually part of being human to oftentimes not know, to feel confused, and to have a whole process around that, right? But that's kind of denied in these moments of like, quick answer, someone else tells you what to do, someone else. So there's that layer of anxiety that I really see too, that I think is really an interesting layering, and also sort of a deeply problematic expectation communicated as to how life works.
Yeah, and especially, by this point, I was kind of figuring out, okay, so when I don't know what to do, I just need to get a blessing, and then I'll know what to do. that's like on my mission. If I jump a little bit ahead, I would get
just to kind of like hit that really finally. We talked at the beginning that you're not growing up as a Mormon girl. Like, what's important to me? What do I love? It's like, how do I perform? How do I make other people not sad? How do I act in a way how do I force myself to be happy, to perform in a way that shows my love for the Lord through my accomplishments, and that never allows for any mistake that would make anyone sad. None of that's about self-identity, self-development. It's just about performance and conformity.
Mm-hmm.
And this just kind of extends that, where, like you said, where a priesthood leader steps in when you don't know what to do and when you're not sure what to do. Well, it's always going to be a priesthood leader that steps in and tells you what's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when I got my mission call, I was actually really hoping that I would serve stateside, is the terminology we use.
Were you going to say something right before?
Well, I'll say it. I'll say it later.
Okay.
I did not want to be called to an area of the world where I would have to learn another language, because my thinking was I only got 18 months to give 100% to God, whereas elders had 2 years. So it was okay for them to take 6 months to a year to learn how to communicate with people. But if that happened to me, I would only have maybe 6 months to actually do what I wanted to do. So I was really, really hoping to serve English speaking, and hopefully just in the United States, so I didn't have anything getting in the way of me doing God's work. Which, I mean, some people, they want to go on a mission and learn a language for self-development, maybe. That was not on my radar.
Or experience a culture from far away, or and it just, that so shows too what an optimizer you were. I was just like, how can we optimize in this situation so that I do yeah.
And lucky, it did turn out I was called to the South Dakota Rapid City mission, which has since turned into the North Dakota Bismarck mission. So that was cool. When I opened my mission call, I was like, whoa, I've never even thought about South Dakota really existing, but I'm going there. Cool. I love it. I was super excited. My mission. Yeah, let's see. When I was buying clothes for my mission, I remember I was kind of learning, how do I put all aspects of myself aside? I didn't even buy clothes that I liked. I just bought clothes that I thought would make me look like a powerful representative of Christ.
Wow.
And kind of in my mission, when I noticed other sisters who wore a little bit more probably flattering, feminine, kind of cute clothes, part of me was a little bit jealous, but also part of me was a little bit judgy, because I thought that's not really what you're here for. We're here to just lose ourselves and go to work. So
there's such a common thread of, like you kind of mentioned, John, just this a denial of self, right? Any sort of remnant of you as an identity or having preference or personality, it's just wipe it clear. That's the ideal.
Yeah.
Erase yourself and become this sort of vessel.
That was the goal. Do you want me to talk about my endowment experience?
If it was noteworthy for you, yeah.
I'll just say, when I went to the temple, I was fortunate enough that my oldest sister had previously been married in the temple. So she gave me kind of a little bit more of a heads up than I think a lot of people get.
Is this one of the two that had lost their faith?
No.
Okay.
The oldest still very faithfully Mormon.
Okay.
So she, besides the temple prep classes that you take and they teach you kind of just general things, she said, read through this section in the Pearl of Great Price that talks about Adam and Eve. She said, look at this picture of the kind of clothes that they wore in the ancient temple, and just like know that there are also special clothes that you'll be wearing. So she gave me kind of some heads up like that, so that when I went through, I wasn't really surprised. And in fact, it all felt really special. When the first part, the initiatory, it was another kind of spiritual highlight of my life where I remember I could feel like kind of tingles going through my whole body, and just like waves and waves of, love and peace, and feeling like I was just washed clean and ready for anything. And also my grandparents, my dad's parents at this time, were getting a little bit older, and it was harder for them to get around, but they came to my endowment. So it was really special to have lots of family there. Yeah.
So overall, your temple endowment experience was what?
It was beautiful. And I went every week until I went on my mission. And one of the hardest things about my mission was that I couldn't go to the temple every week.
Yeah.
I have just a few, I won't say everything about my mission because that would take forever. I will say I was super obedient. That was, my grandpa told me, be obedient. And I was like, yes, that's the way. That's the way. I had 2 mission presidents. The first one, President Anderson, he's like retired military or something. So he was very strict and a little more old fashioned, like just get out and tract. Just like keep working hard, And I loved him and Sister Anderson a lot. And I felt very close with them. My mission was kind of like rural farmland. Every companionship had a car in our mission, which is not common. Most missionaries don't have cars, but we could drive for 2 hours from the middle of our area to the outside and like still be in our branch.
So you needed a car to get around.
We needed a car to get around.
Yeah.
And it was kind of hard to find people who are interested. Most people there are very happily like Lutheran. Everyone was really nice to me though. They were all very like, knock on door, they open it, they maybe let you in, or they say, we appreciate what you're doing, but we're just not interested. So I did have a lot of kind of social anxiety about that. And I remember like every day it was really hard for me to wake up and go talk to strangers about, I knew they didn't want to talk to me. I felt much more comfortable like working with ward lists and talking with either inactive members or helping active members, just helping them feel more faithful. That felt way more comfortable to me. I did get a little bit compulsive, I think, about like health and exercise, which happens to a lot of missionaries. I think my trainer, which is like the person who is in charge of kind of teaching you everything that you need to know and what you need to do, she was very strict about obedience, and we need to wake up 5 minutes early before 6:30, 6:25. So, you could pray and be going at 6:30 and hopefully be out the door jogging. Mm-hmm. And I was in North Dakota in October when I was a baby, when I was a greenie. So it was kind of cold. And, for a while, like I didn't even have my quilt hadn't been sent there yet. And I didn't have all the coats and everything figured out because you just have to kind of get there and buy what you need. So there was some times of physically like not being warm enough, but just kind of pushing through it. And I was, after that, always very like kind of kind of now I feel bad for some companions that I have that I like, we have to wake up and we have to work out for half an hour every day. And there, you know, sometimes it would get to the point where I would get sick a little bit, you know, from just working so hard, constantly, never taking a break. You'd get a cold every now and then, and it was so relieving to not have to go outside and to not have to feel bad about it. So anytime I got sick or my companion got sick, I had like a very guilty, like, oh, finally we could just rest. Yeah.
This matches kind of your high school experience
Yeah.
of just hyper performing. Like
Yeah.
it's just kind of a continuation.
Yeah.
Is that what you're thinking, Margie?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I was also,
exhausting.
I learned how to kind of chase. I kind of figured out what I needed to do to like get called as a trainer and then as a sister training leader.
Mm-hmm.
So those both happened. And I definitely, like, I liked the feeling of feeling like I was worthy because I was trusted to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I was also, because I was a little bit more involved with the leadership, I was made more aware of, there were a lot of missionaries who had like really bad chronic illnesses, really bad anxiety, really bad depression, who were struggling, and a lot of us were going home. And that was kind of something that started to be my job to help take care of. So, you know, we would go on splits with other sisters. So I would go with one of them, and then my companion would go with another one. And we'd spend a day with them. And usually it would just be like them talking about how bad they were doing, which was, you know, a lot to deal with. And I had several companions who had their own depression and things that they were dealing with. And I didn't realize at the time, but I definitely had some of my own, but I just couldn't allow myself to even recognize it. So that was really, it felt fulfilling, but it was really draining to be like in charge of other people my age, you know.
What's causing emotions to come up for you when you talk about experiencing other sister missionaries struggling with mental health and or wanting to stay on the mission?
I guess just remembering, like, at the time how hard it was for these sisters who, you know, just as much as I did, they wanted to stay and serve a faithful mission and find the people that they were meant to find, you know. And going home is so, I mean, it's not what anyone plans. And it's so socially awkward, and no one wants to go home early. Especially, it seemed like there was a little bit of a difference with some elders in the mission. They just kind of had to be there. But if you were a sister, you like really wanted to be there. So it was a great trial of faith for a lot of us when someone really wanted to be there and they're trying so hard, but it was just getting harder and harder, and eventually they had to go home.
Yeah, that was hard on them, and it was hard on you to see it.
Yeah. Although I am really grateful that my mission presidents took that seriously, because I know that doesn't happen everywhere. Mm-hmm. That when people needed to go home, they did go home.
Yeah.
I guess I can also say when I was a missionary, it was right before they made the change that you could talk to your family every week. So I think a lot of it was just only being able to write letters and emails to your family once a week, and then like have a 1 hour Skype call on Christmas and Mother's Day.
Right. It's kind of like that, all the expectations that are really, you know, a mission is a lot, and what's asked of you down to the minute is oftentimes, you know, set out before you.
If you come in before 9:00 p.m., you've done something wrong.
Yeah. So it's such this, I mean, talk about like, high expectations. And then you think but you're going to lose your support people during that time as well. That's and kind of cut you off from those people that oftentimes know you best and kind of know your story, or who can really, that's a whole other level. And I really feel for you as a young person out there, as deeply feeling as you are, to be in a position of seeing this play out, where it's like high expectations, and you see, friends and people that you really care about giving everything and it not being enough. And on some level, internalizing or feeling really, the difficult feelings of, or the shame in going home, or the self-judgment that why can't I do it when I want it this badly? And then you also being in a position of being like, it not feeling easy for you either, and so you're holding your story and your difficulty and your challenges and theirs at the same time.
Yeah.
And that just would feel very overwhelming, I can imagine.
Yeah. But it did feel like it was what I was supposed to be doing, because it felt, it's my job to put myself aside and take care of other people. And that was what I felt like I needed to do.
Yeah, I was curious about that, just because in connecting with your brain, it feels like a key part of your brain is kind of defining what success looks like at this stage in your development. And so going into a mission, oftentimes you think of success being baptisms or whatever. And you're saying clearly that was something that was not happening in your mission. So how did you define success for you on your mission at this point?
One thing was, I had a goal for myself that every time I was transferred, I wanted to feel devastated because I was going to miss everyone there. So I wanted to get really close to the ward, the missionaries around. And that was true. I did feel like I got really close to every ward and branch that I was in. And I felt like I needed to take care of my companions as well as any other missionaries that were around. And then I also felt like I was working on my own conversion, making sure, besides maybe hopefully the people that I can influence around me, that I can be perfectly solid. One really positive thing about my mission experience was one companion that I had. She was a little bit more emotionally mature, I think, maybe than I was, even though she was younger than I was. And she could kind of see through my facade. And she was, for the first while, she was always asking me, like, what's wrong? I could tell something's wrong. And I would say, nothing's wrong, I'm fine. And then finally, I guess she wore me down. And I finally told her how I felt. And I remember that as the first time I ever told anyone how I felt. For real. So I did have, some experiences like that with people who I felt really close to because we were together all the time. I finally started learning how to notice myself and talk about it just a little bit.
Wow.
Do you remember what you told her?
I think I said that I was feeling frustrated about something. I don't remember what it was.
But that felt big to you?
It was huge.
Yeah, you connected to yourself and you expressed genuinely something that you were feeling. That's huge. You verbalized it.
We had to do this all the time, me and this companion. And I realized I called it the conflict sandwich.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or like, there's like the storm cloud and then the rainbow. Because it was so hard and so scary to talk about how we both felt. And the longer we went without talking, the bigger the sandwich got, the more filling in the sandwich you had to fit your mouth around. But I was learning, it feels like you're going to die, but you're not. And it feels actually really good afterwards when you talk about how you feel.
Yeah.
I mean, as somebody who's never experienced perfectionism, toxic perfectionism, they're going to be like, wah, you finally told someone how you felt. Like, but I'm guessing the pressure cooker of never being able to ever say how you feel. And I think to Margie's point of never even being allowed to be in, never allowing yourself to be in touch with your own feelings can actually be highly detrimental to your mental health and well-being.
Yeah, I didn't know that like I could have my own internal world outside of someone else's. So I would just like, if I saw someone else who was sad, I would kind of feel sad with them. But it was really dependent on who I was around, kind of what I thought I was feeling. And it was not really, I didn't know that you were supposed to like know how you felt inside and that it could be different from how someone else felt. Yeah.
This makes sense. It really does.
It might sound small to a lot of people, but that sounds like that was a really huge moment for you.
It was really big.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would be surprised if it sounds small because I do feel like, particularly for women in the church, this does not feel foreign to me. It feels very much like, and if you look at the work of Brené Brown, we know it does not just exist in our religion. It exists everywhere. This idea of perfectionism as an armor. Mm-hmm. It literally is an armor, and it makes you this idea that you're not vulnerable and that we have to show this certain, part of our identity or a way of showing up in the world, that it's incredibly isolating, and that the anecdote is sort of this idea of vulnerability, which is what you did. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like, oh, I'm actually not okay. For you not to be completely perfect at a given moment and to say, it is the way through. It is the way that you actually are able to feel not lonely, not completely isolated. Mm-hmm. And because that is what the armor of perfectionism does. It keeps us all from actually really seeing, who we are, right? It's just, I'm fine. Nope, yeah. I'm fine. Yep, we're here to do this and I'm here to do it. And
yeah. And who knows, if I hadn't gone on a mission, maybe I would have learned it somewhere else, but I learned it on my mission.
That was your moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
I also...
Shout out to the sister missionary that made you feel...
Yeah.
She
safe.
knows who she is.
It's brilliant.
We're still pretty good friends.
Oh, good.
I think we'll be friends forever.
Good.
I also... When my first mission president left, we got the second mission president, President Hess. He's actually a general authority now, which was really exciting when that happened because he's awesome. He was a businessman, and he had not served a mission when he was younger because he kind of had joined the church a little bit later. So he was really he promoted us being a little more creative with what we did. So instead of just going out and tracting and unless it was, negative 30 degrees when it was too cold to go outside tracting. You weren't allowed to go outside. Other than that, we would go outside tracting. He was like, if you need to like spend some extra time planning activities or thinking of different ways that you could share the gospel, like do that. So I think I flourished a little bit more like missionary wise with that kind of counsel, because I had some companions who we would like, my last companion, we wrote some like musical arrangements and we'd knock on people's doors and like sing them a hymn. And we did some like stake and ward fireside musical things that people could bring. And that was it seemed way more comfortable for the ward members as well as just people in general to have kind of music be involved. And I liked that a lot better too. Yeah. Yeah. I guess I also want to say another like kind of highlight on my mission. Just at the time, it was so cool. Elder Renland came and toured our mission. It was actually right before he was called to be an apostle. So I'm not sure if he was what kind of level of general authority he was, but he came and talked to us and it was so cool. And we got to shake his hand. And then it was like the next weekend or so that it was general conference and they were calling all the new apostles, 3 new apostles. And I remember we were all like, wouldn't it be so cool if Elder Renland was the next apostle? Because we all met him and he was the best. And he was. So that felt like we had been extra blessed to kind of get to know an apostle, before his time. It was really cool.
We love our apostles in Mormonism, don't we?
Yeah. Yeah. It was kind of at that point, my dream was to get married, go home and figure out getting married and stuff and hurry and get old and retire so I could go on another mission and maybe if I was lucky, get to be involved more in church leadership because I loved it so much. And all the people, the senior missionaries we worked with were so wonderful. Yeah.
And that way your kind of whole life gets kind of planned out for you at that point.
Yeah.
You're kind of on the train.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So, there are more stories I could tell, but I think that's a pretty good snapshot of what my mission was like. I could have gone home early for a job opportunity, and my mission president was so business savvy. He was actually encouraging me to go if I wanted to, but I really didn't want to go. I was like, I want to extend. So that was kind of a trial that I had at the end, was figuring out what I wanted to do, and I did end up deciding after so much fasting and prayer, I felt really good about staying. And then I ended up having a crazy experience with one sister in the ward that we were in. She had, the rest of her family was in, and she'd married an LDS man, but she had never been baptized. It never felt right for her. And because I was still there, I ended up being in her ward. And for whatever reason, me and the other sister I was with were the missionaries she needed. And it all clicked and she was baptized. So that kind of felt like my sign of that was why I needed to stay.
What a way to end.
Yeah.
So a great 18 months.
18 months.
Yeah.
Lots of stress and, lots of up and downs. But I was, for the most part, really happy with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I went home. I went back to BYU. And I was kind of thinking hopefully I find a guy I want to marry, but if not, this mission thing was awesome. Maybe I could just be sort of like a Mormon nun. Just they let single sisters go on missions longer than they let elders. So I was my backup plan is kind of just graduate BYU and then just go on missions forever. So that was kind of what I was planning. And I did actually, before my mission, I auditioned to get in the School of Music again, and I did not get in. So I came back and I was like, okay, I need to get ready to do another audition so I can do the music thing. And I'm only going to audition one more time because I probably need to, like, if it's not going to work out, it's just not going to work out. So I had, like, my sophomore year back for my mission was kind of this crazy mix of, like, I went to the CAP center to get diagnosed for ADHD because one of my older siblings was like, hey, I think I have ADHD and I think you do too. So I went before school started and I got an assessment and they said, yeah, you have ADHD and you also have an anxiety disorder. And I was like, huh, I thought I was fine. And then it was like that.
For those who don't know, CAP stands for Counseling and
yeah.
Psychological Services. And it's basically the university counseling center for mental health at BYU. And my understanding is there are amazing therapists there that are very supportive no matter what your experience is.
Yeah.
So for any BYU students who happen to be watching who need mental health support or feel like they might, my understanding is CAPS is a very safe and healthy place generally to go.
It can be kind of hard to get in because, well, they do have a lot of staff. There's just always a really long wait list. So, but I did like get in to the wait. I got in. So I was able to start having like talk therapy that year, which was really helpful. So that year I started having panic attacks. I didn't really know what they were, but I was starting to be like, oh, I probably do have anxiety. And like, I kind of tried taking medicine for a while, but I didn't like how it felt. So I just didn't. I was like, I'll just exercise and like eat healthy, which probably just made it a little bit worse, to be honest. I also started dating this guy that he seemed really nice and like a good Mormon. And I was like, great, let's get married. But it was like, now I could see it was not really meant to be. At the time, I really, really liked him. And we would like date for like a month. But then I would like have a panic attack and feel like really bad about myself. And I would like text him and say, I'm sorry, I don't feel good. We got to break up. And I would break up with him. And then I would be like really depressed for a while. But then we'd like get back together. And that just happened like back and forth all year. And finally at the end of the year, he was like, I thought he was like, we need to talk. And I was like, yeah, we need to talk because we need to figure out when we're going to get married. And he was like, we need to like really break up. And I was so blindsided because I was still so oblivious. Like I was starting to have a little bit of an awareness, but I was, yeah.
Had your mission president given you counsel at the end of your mission on what regarding marriage and child rearing? What was that counsel?
Yeah, get married. Find someone worthy to take you to the temple, and it's great if they're an RM too, because we both would get it. And he was an RM. There was also like the church had started a program to help missionaries kind of phase out of missions. So there was like some goal setting and things. So I had set some goals about like dating is scary, but I got to do it. And I'm going to try to go on this many dates and I'm going to like try to find the one. So that was happening.
And just to be clear, this is by what, 2015?
2016.
2016?
Yeah.
Yeah. So by this point, we had interviewed Samantha and Tanner, Zelf on the Shelf. The church was losing its millennials. It was starting to hemorrhage. They were starting to find out that upwards of 80% of the kids raised Mormon in the U.S. were choosing to leave the church even after serving missions. And so lowering the mission age didn't solve the problem. And so they implemented some of these programs post-mission to see if there was a way they could keep kids from leaving the church after serving a mission.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That was the program?
Yeah. And actually, at this point, I had never heard of MormonStories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wasn't referring to MormonStories. It's just the church's
response to,
By this time, the church is starting to really get worried that they're going to be losing entire generations of Mormons by 2015, 2016.
Yeah.
Because there had been the ordained women stuff with with Kate Kelly and the excommunication, the gospel topics essays, CES letter, the internet, and all that stuff, along with whatever else, just national or global dynamics, was just causing youth to just flee any religion, let alone Mormonism. So you were right there.
Yeah.
In the
in
churches.
that wave.
Yeah.
You were in that wave.
Yeah. So were those programs helpful to you?
I loved it.
Yeah.
What
were the programs? Describe them if you want.
It was called like My Plan, I think. And there was like I think we had an extra hour on P Day for like the last 6 weeks of our mission to go through like a website, kind of like, it was kind of like watching a work training or something. There was like, here's this video you watch. Now like go write down this from this prompt. Like, what are your thoughts? And there was like a place for you to write it down like on a worksheet or something so you could take it with you. And I kind of had a soapbox that I thought it was insane that we couldn't go back to the MTC after our mission to help us like retransition back to normal life. It's like, well, I'm glad they have this My Plan thing, but I want to go back to the MTC for a while before I go back home. Yeah. I just had to go home. Like, didn't let me back into the MTC. Yeah, so let's see. I was that kind of dating thing was happening that year, that sophomore year. And then I was also twice. I was that summer, and then the school year, I was the Relief Society president of 2 different wards, which felt, it's like, yep, I need to stay on the path. I need to keep having like leadership callings. So that was great. That was what I wanted. It was a little bit similar to being a missionary in the sense that it seemed like a lot of BYU students in our ward, and probably everywhere, were having a lot of anxiety and depression. So that's mostly what we talked about. But I liked it. I would also, a little like an idea of kind of how I was doing outside of my unawareness is on a Sunday, I would come home from church at like 3:00 and I would just fall asleep and sleep all until the next day. And there were several days where I would just be so tired that I would just like, it was like the afternoon and I would just go home and fall asleep. And I was like, sure, I have anxiety or whatever, but it's fine. I'll just read my scriptures more and figure it out.
And this strikes me as what we call a comorbidity, where you have an anxiety disorder, but it's wearing you out so much that it's sort of causing depression symptoms to emerge, where now you've got anxiety, an untreated anxiety that leads to depression. So you've got anxiety and depression. If that sounds right to you, that's what it sounds like.
I wasn't really diagnosed with depression, but I would say I at least had depressive episodes pretty frequently that year.
Yeah. And sometimes it's like, honestly, anxiety is so exhausting. It is so that shutdown, that sort of forced shutdown of sleep is
your
essential.
body's just like, you gotta
it's
stop.
like not even a choice. It's just sort of like,
you're doing too much.
Yeah.
Or you've got some things you need to work through, or you're not in tune with yourself. Any of those things are possible.
Yeah. So I was also that year kind of prepping to audition one more time. For the opera performance program major. And I thought, if I don't get in this time, I'm just not going to do it. But I want to try one more time.
BYU is highly competitive.
It is.
It's not quite Juilliard, but
there are people who get into Juilliard for their undergrad who do not get into BYU.
Yeah. Yep. It's that intense.
Yeah. Just because everyone wants to go there.
Yeah. And Mormons crank out a lot of great singers, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that summer, I had a bit of like a sort of a breakdown with like the guy being like, yeah, we're not getting married. We're not even like, we're not a thing. Like, this is not healthy. That was really hard. And so I got signed up to go on a study abroad with the choir programs in London. And that was kind of like a bit of a turnaround moment for me. I got to know the faculty really well there. And it was really a really cool study abroad experience where we would just like in the day, we would go to a classroom to talk about the concert that we were going to watch that night. Then that afternoon, we were free to go explore museums or watch a musical or whatever. And then that night, we would go to a different choir concert. And it was just like weeks and weeks of that. And that made me really excited and kind of gave me the idea of maybe I can help our church choral music be this good. Because after listening to all these, professional English choirs and then listening to the Tabernacle choir again, it was like, oh, that's a difference. And like, we are the Lord's church. We could be doing better. So I kind of came out of that experience with that goal in mind. And I was also a little bit revived in like feeling optimistic about life and myself. And that, like the week after that was when I met my now husband. So he was just like, his grandparents lived in my home ward and he was there just for the weekend. And I was there just that weekend. And his grandma introduced us after Relief Society because she said, his name is Zach. She said, Zach, there's this wonderful girl you've got to meet. And when we first met, I thought, he just looks like not my type. He's like too like buff and like generically good looking to be the kind of person I probably want to be with. So I kind of wrote him off and was maybe a little bit standoffish, but he found me on Facebook and messaged me later to see if I wanted to go on a date. But I had left to go live with my aunt for the rest of the summer. So it didn't end up working out for us to go on a date then, but we did all summer talk on Facebook. And I had a summer of working a terrible vitamin bottling factory job that was just not fun. But, I needed money because I'd just been gone forever and spent all my money. And then I was in a YSA ward, and I just went on date after date with like people I just did not connect with. And then this guy was so cool. So when we got back together, when we got to school at the same time, because he was also at BYU, we went on a date like one of the first weekends of school. And I remember I opened the door and I was like, whoa, he looks way different than I remember. And I was like feeling butterflies and feeling like kind of in love in a way I'd never had before. And it was so exciting. And like when we finished what we thought was going to be the date, we were like still having fun. So then we went to my apartment and had ice cream and we were still having fun. So it's just like really hard to like stop because we just immediately hit off really well.
What are you grinning over there about, Margie?
Oh, it might be reminding me of our first date. That's all. Love
That's
it.
sweet.
BYU love.
BYU love. It's so fun.
Is this the gentleman you end up marrying?
Mm-hmm.
Zach?
Yeah,
Okay.
Zach.
Okay.
He's awesome. Then the next day was some church devotion. The next day was Sunday and we went to like some church broadcast devotional together and that was awesome. And then the next day was Monday and he invited me to go like eat lunch with him. And we did eat lunch together, but I noticed like he wasn't as engaged in conversation as I was, and I was like, oh no, like something's wrong. And after that, he kind of like lost interest for a while, and me and my roommates were crushed because we all thought it was the best.
I love how the roommates are in there.
Yeah.
It's the collective experience.
It is. Yeah, so we were all very sad. But then a month later, I was like sitting in the library. So, I guess I didn't also mention that summer I did get into the program.
Oh,
Yes, I left that out because
wow.
I was swept away by the romance in my brain.
Yeah.
Yes. So the summer of like after my crazy sophomore year with like this weird dating experience and like super bad anxiety, then I went to London and I got into the program and like everything was just kind of working out. So I was like, yeah, we got this. I like went to the temple enough or something. It finally worked. So yeah, a month later, Zach ran into me and I was in the library sitting on the floor by all the printers with all of the music books open from the library has all the music books. And I was getting ready to copy my music for the semester. And for whatever reason, he thought that was like kind of dorky and weird that I was sitting on the floor in the library. So he walked over, started talking to me, and we ended up every day after that talking. And then in November, I was scratching his back when we were sitting next to each other watching a devotional. And he looked over and he said, "Can I take you out to dinner tonight?" And I was like, yeah, because I knew he was going to ask me to be his girlfriend, and he did. And then, you know, it was really exciting when we finally held hands, and then we kissed, which was like, I had kissed the other guy before, but this felt a little bit more like butterflies-ish rather than just kind of scary. Mm-hmm. So yeah, then when it was Thanksgiving, it was really hard to be apart. And then, you know, the end of the semester is Christmas break. So we were like, well, we're going to like get each other something nice for Christmas. So I made him a scarf. I learned how to knit, and I knit him a scarf, and he wore it when we went to Temple Square together. And then he gave me a book that he had made, and it had pictures of us in it, and it had pictures of me at the end. And then he said, "I love you" for the first time. And I said, "I love you" for the first time. It was so great. We were so in love and so happy. And then I had to drive him to the airport and drop him off so he could be with his family for Christmas. And it was the worst Christmas ever because we were apart. So I was very mopey and sad all Christmas. I just couldn't wait to get back. And then I had a moment the day before going back to school. I felt within myself, we're going to start talking about marriage soon. Just heads up. And I was like, oh, weird. That seems crazy. I was kind of thinking I would date someone for 2 or 3 years before we got married. I did not want to do the standard rushed BYU marriage. But I went back to school, and he kind of was about to say something. You know, I'd picked him up. He was back in my apartment. But then he stopped himself, and I was like, what were you going to say? And he's like, can we talk about it later? Anyway, he realized he was about to say when we have a house. So then he's like, so I think maybe we need to talk about whether or not we're going to get married. So we did. And so that was January of 2018. And I honestly had kind of felt like I wanted to marry him since our first date, but I never told him because that was crazy. You can't tell someone that. But I really felt good about it. And it was really weird because you kind of pointed out, Margie, I've had a lot of anxiety about making decisions in my life. And I always thought it would be really hard to decide how to get married. But from the beginning, I always felt really comfortable around him. There was never anxiety. I felt like I could just be myself. I was never doing the fake being happy thing around him. And he didn't do it either. And when we talked about getting married, he was really honest with me about some of masturbation and pornography things that he felt really bad about. And I just remember being so taken aback that he would trust me with that. It helped me just feel closer with him. So I know some people, it feels differently, but when he shared that with me, I knew like, well, I know this is hard for him and this is a thing he struggles with and doesn't want to do. So I'm not like mad at him. I just am grateful that he would be honest with me, like once we're getting serious, you know?
That must have been great for him to have you respond that way.
Yeah.
Versus with shame and judgment.
Yeah. Well, I mean, small aside, I really wanted him to come and tell his story because he has a great story too. But he was like, whatever. He did say I could share this. But yeah, that's been, you know, for like for many guys, a really big, hard thing for him to kind of deal with. Yeah.
I'm curious, so we introduced the idea of asexuality at the beginning of this episode.
Uh-huh.
And as I'm thinking about my daughter Clara's book that she wrote about asexuality, one of the most important things about that book for me was the part about different types of attraction. Mm-hmm. That we usually, when we say attraction, we think sexual attraction. But the truth is there are lots of dimensions of attraction. There's aesthetic attraction, which is how beautiful or handsome
or style
they are. There's, friendship, kind of emotional attraction, how emotionally connected you are.
Mm-hmm.
There is intellectual attraction, how intellectually attracted you are. Lots of different types of attraction. And we're not ever taught to really distinguish between all them. Mm-hmm. We just kind of think of it as a binary, are we attracted or not? And that's it. And then, of course, because we're taught the law of chastity, we're taught we are never to experiment sexually prior to marriage, don't even do anything to arouse the passions. Mm-hmm. Then if you don't experience sexual attraction, or if you're just really hardcore about that requirement, it can make things very interesting in terms of what you don't discover or explore prior to marriage. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to have you talk about this before you're ready, but I'm wondering if any of this comes in, if this is a good time in your storyline to even start exploring any of these topics or not.
Yeah. I guess at this point, like prior to this experience, whenever I heard someone saying they had a hard time keeping the law of chastity, I was always like thinking that I must like be way more righteous or something, because it was just never hard for me. Like that was never a temptation for me. In fact, it was like, it would just kind of make me nervous to like think about like doing anything like that. And it wasn't until I met Zach and we got really close, and I think I started to feel really strong romantic attraction to him. And
that's different from sexual attraction.
Yeah,
that is.
And then as we got closer,
how would you describe the difference between sexual attraction and romantic attraction, if you even
I guess
can or would?
I think I still feel like I don't quite understand maybe what sexual attraction is, but I think it is just like if you want to have sex with someone. And versus romantic attraction is like if you've watched the best like romantic movie, like Pride and Prejudice. I love Pride and Prejudice. I've always have. Or like good romance stories is just like feeling like loving to spend like do romantic things together and like feeling so in love. That's kind of how I understand them. So I felt really like romantically interested in this guy, in Zach. And then later on, I did start to eventually like have this compulsion to be close with him that I had never really felt before, which was like, oh, that's what it is. And it was also kind of relieving because at this point I was like, aren't you supposed to like want to have sex with people? And like, aren't you supposed to want to kiss? Like people talk about like having crushes on celebrities, and like I would kind of like say someone that I thought was kind of cool maybe, but it was never like a natural intuitive thing for me until then.
So there's a difference between feeling romantically attracted to someone, thinking they're beautiful, aesthetic attraction, being close friends, feeling romantically attracted to them. There's a difference between all that and feeling sexually attracted to them, which is I want to have sex with them.
Yeah.
And that maybe wasn't super strong for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it did kind of happen with Zach, although it wasn't initially there. Mm-hmm. And it was really surprising when I started to feel that way. Yeah, I guess before this, I kind of thought I just needed to base a marriage on like spiritual compatibility, maybe. Mm-hmm.
And that's also a form of attraction, spiritual attraction, right?
And I mean, he was an awesome. I was very spiritually impressed by him too. In many ways, I was very impressed by this guy. But yeah, so we decided we were going to get married, and I bought my wedding dress in February because I also was thinking that I wanted to go on another study abroad before we got married, this time to Austria. So we were planning on getting married in August, but because of like scheduling things, we just kept having to move our wedding forward. So we ended up getting married in June. So we like officially got engaged in March, we were planning on getting married, but you have to like buy the ring and then like have the proposal that like people take pictures of, and then a couple weeks after that, I flew off to Vienna to be gone for like 7 weeks. And then I came back, and a week later we got married, which was hard and crazy. I didn't realize like it was so I would call Zach an allosexual person, which is the terminology for, I guess, kind of high or normal, maybe, like being interested in being physically close with the person that you love. So it was really hard for me to be gone, like physically gone, like 8 hours away while we were engaged. It was hard for me too. I really missed him.
Maybe hard for him in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah. And kind of that summer, once we got back together, like the week before our wedding, I was really stressed because I had gained a little bit of weight eating pastries all the time. So I was like trying to like hurry fad diet, which was terrible. But I was because I'd already bought my wedding dress. And they couldn't change it. So I was like kind of dieting and cranky and like stressing about getting everything ready for our wedding. So by the time it was our wedding, I was like not feeling very sexually interested, if you know what I mean, because I was just so overwhelmed with everything. So, but I was kind of like expecting once everything calmed down, it would get easier. But that summer was not the easiest. It didn't just come naturally like we thought it would. I actually signed up and took a healthy sexuality class at BYU, which was really helpful. But it's still having gone my whole life just being completely unaware and not really caring about that part of myself. And then being married to someone who had been a little bit more aware of his own sexuality was a lot of headbutting, for sure. And we've kind of looked back and thought, like, what if like we had been able to figure a little bit more out before we got married? Would that have put less pressure on both of us, less pressure on me, less pressure on him, less fear about everything working out? Because I quickly found like it was a cycle of feeling like really like guilty and kind of shameful for not like automatically being the way that I thought I was supposed to be, or like feeling really interested all the time. And then because I felt so guilty, that just made it harder and harder. So it was kind of like a spiral of really hard time figuring it out. And then there was also the element of it was my job to keep my husband virtuous, because if he messed up.
And when you say messed up, just to make it explicit for the listeners.
Yeah. So if it had been a while since we had sex and he ended up like masturbating, even though we tried to tell each other, it's not my fault, it felt like it was my fault.
Yeah.
And I worried that him marrying me was hurting him. Even though we loved each other, there was just so much both expectation culturally for things to just be easy, as well as so much shame for any sort of deviance that I even then was starting to recognize, like, I don't think this is bad. Like, I don't think masturbating it doesn't seem that bad to me. But that was kind of confusing. So.
And is it okay if we tease a few things out, really? Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to put on my memory of learning about asexuality from Clara and others. But first of all, it's important to understand that being asexual does not necessarily mean having no libido, that you can be asexual and have a high sex drive as a man or a woman, but that would just mean that you feel driven maybe to masturbate or to have your own sexual experience. The real linchpin for whether one is asexual or not is whether they have sexual desire for another person, as I understand it.
Yeah.
So you don't want to confuse a low libido with asexuality.
Right.
You could be asexual and have a high libido, or asexual and have a normal libido, or be asexual and have a low libido.
Yeah.
So there's that distinction. It's all about whether or not you were feeling sexual desire for your husband, right?
Right.
And you said in the engagement period, you did feel some sexual attraction or desire towards him. Once the wedding happened,
it wasn't all the time. Yeah. I guess to kind of clarify things, I've had a few years to kind of figure this out. And the way that I best understand myself at this point in time is I consider myself to be demisexual. So that's under the umbrella term of asexuality, which can kind of have a lot of different aspects. So demisexuality means that you don't have sexual attraction for someone unless you have like a really close emotional bond with them first. So like some people will only feel sexual attraction to like one or two people in their life. So that to me, like when I was in high school, when I was in middle school, I never like felt that way about anyone. And I thought it was just because I was like a good Mormon.
you were virtuous.
Yeah, I thought I was just being a guardian of virtue. But I didn't realize until later, like, no, there are people who like feel this way. Like many people do. Most people feel this way. It's like a hard thing to like have to block that part of yourself out. Yeah, so and then I guess I would also kind of my sexual experience is a little bit gray sexual too. So sometimes it's a little bit more than other times. So it's never like consistent with my partner. Yeah.
And another aspect that I think might be good to mention is just this idea of, a spectrum, and for some that sexual attraction component not being there, it can show up as sex averse, meaning, no, never, right?
Actual aversion,
yes,
where you experience sex as distasteful or gross or
right,
revolting,
as opposed to kind of neutral, which and then so that would also influence, I think, the experience of relationship within. I just think it's important to kind of mention how that can play out.
That's a good point.
And just define for people what you mean by gray sexual.
I mean, I just kind of get this off of the asexual Reddit subreddit. So that's a good place to look if you're kind of want to see different ideas. But so some people feel just totally no sexual attraction ever, no interest ever, no romantic attraction ever. So they would be on the slide, they would be very very asexual. But some people sometimes feel towards some people some attraction. So that would be sliding up the scale. It's now gray, right? So that's kind of the gray sexual is sometimes one feels sexual attraction and sometimes one does not.
It reminds me of the cake analogy. I just feel like it works super well of yes, I like cake. I like to eat cake. You offer me cake and I like to eat it.
Mm-hmm.
Some people like cake.
Yes. Yeah. And some people are I like cake sometimes, on occasion, kind of depends, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or no, I just don't like cake.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I guess to do the cake thing, it's I felt well, my husband really likes cake. And he will crave cake. And I don't, I kind of rarely crave it, but I'll eat it. I'll enjoy it. I don't think about it. It just it's not pinging in my brain that I'm craving cake. you could say. So for the first part of our marriage, I thought it was just because he was a guy and I was a girl, and I was maybe Molly Mormon syndrome, which is what some people have called having a hard time feeling sexual after being raised in a very shameful culture. But yeah, this is kind of the understanding I've come to now. This is what's going on.
So it wasn't Molly Mormon syndrome.
I don't think so. I mean, there was some of that too, for sure. Because I spent my whole life identifying as not being interested. So it was hard to rewire that too. Or feeling even okay with having sex. Yeah.
Yeah. So if I had to summarize what I'm hearing is that no sexual exploration before marriage.
Mm-hmm.
That be conceptualized as just righteousness.
Mm-hmm.
Then you get married. Your husband is feeling a lot of sex drive generally, but a lot of sexual attraction to you specifically.
Mm-hmm.
You're not always feeling that in return.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a disparity in terms of desire and frequency around sex that ends up making him feel frustrated, you feeling sad, you both wondering why the discrepancy. And then if he finds a way to supplement or, get his sexual needs met through masturbation, then he would feel guilty and sad. He would probably feel some animosity towards you as maybe being the cause of that. And then you would also feel guilt and shame about maybe being the cause of that, but also wondering if it was healthy for you to be viewed as the solution to his sexual needs for a sexual outlet.
Yeah.
Because that would leave you feeling objectified, maybe.
Yeah, that captures it pretty well.
And I do think this is interesting if we're looking at sort of monogamy as like a construct. I do feel like this is one of the major challenges and maybe a pitfall of this religious message of almost kind of a sexual ownership or a sexual relationship where in relationship, particularly monogamy, we are to show up to fulfill single-handedly. One human is showing up to fulfill another human's sexual needs. It's a no-go, right? It's just super complicated. And I think it is one of the harder aspects to a monogamous relationship, you know?
And I think especially in a very strict LDS sort of setting, it's like there's nothing you can do. Like there's no way to sort of compromise in a way that makes everyone feel like they're taken care of.
Right.
Yeah.
That's such a good point. No outlets, no resources, the things that normally you could kind of work through, like having someone take care of themselves, like honestly to help and take care of themselves is it is not an option. Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll do what I sometimes do and ask the really hard, somewhat offensive question, because in the history of Mormonism, there would, and this is probably not just a uniquely Mormon thing, there would be sort of this wisdom of like, wives, be available for your husband. That's your duty to just whatever your husband's in need, you be there for him. And that way he won't sin, but it'll strengthen your marriage and he won't want to stray because you are always perpetually available. Now Margie's already smiling at me, but that's very common Mormon wisdom to be passed down to the women. And if you were to say what might be either suboptimal / damaging about that, what would you say in response to an Orthodox Mormon who's like, come on, that's your job?
Well, I would say at that point, I kind of expected that. And I thought that was how it was going to go. And I was ready to do that. But I married the right guy and he wanted me to be happy, which I'm really grateful for. I'm really grateful that, for one, I loved myself enough to marry someone who would care about me in that way. Because it would have been really, I'm sure, easy to find someone who wasn't like that at BYU. But I was lucky enough to do that. And I'm really grateful that he was able to, still does kind of put me first and always make sure that I'm feeling loved and safe and comfortable too. I guess if I was to respond to this devil's advocate person and say, what's wrong with it? Well, what kind of marriage is that? If one person is just being stepped on. And I'm really lucky that is not what happened to me. It has definitely been a good opportunity to communicate how we both feel, because we both have very different headspaces around like it's just really hard for me to understand how he feels, and it's really hard for him to understand how I feel, at least if we base it on just like our own experience,
I think on a level, it's important to realize how culturally programmed we are, that just sex is a given. Everyone likes it. Everyone wants it. I have a memory that it was in the DSM, quite frankly, not too long ago. I think, on a level being educated, it's not so different from, I think, other things. And so this idea of love being that you're creating a world together and it involves two different people, then to me, I don't know what you're creating if one part of you is betraying yourself to show up for another. I don't know that that's healthy love. I don't know that, and so being able to sort of have conversations as to, hey, this is what it is for me. Okay, and that's what it is for you. And looking at it as more of kind of a coming together in a way that's honoring and creating a love that's familiar to you, instead of, this idea of I have to figure it out. I need to figure you out. And this needs to make sense to me. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I think that's an excuse sometimes to actually not offer compassion and just be able to say, it almost doesn't matter. Your experience is just valid. So what do we want to do? And how do we create a love and this sense of intimacy that feels like it's intimacy for you? And how do I also get my needs met? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I guess ideally, every marriage is probably everyone's a little bit different, right? So hopefully you can both talk about what you're both needing constantly and take care of each other and yourself, no matter where you are on the spectrum.
That's right.
Beautiful. Thank you. Mm-hmm. And thank you for being here. Yeah. So I guess you're saying that made your first year or two of marriage maybe more difficult than it needed to be, this dynamic.
It was hard. That element was hard, but at the same time, it felt really cool to have someone that I trusted that much to talk to about stuff like this. Cause just a few years ago was the first time I'd been open about how I really felt. So in that way, it was really, really rewarding. Plus I am pretty highly romantically interested. I have high romantic interest, and it feels really nice to be pursued and cared about in that way, to have someone who loves me and will talk to me about stuff, talk with me about things a lot. Feels really I don't know, nice. So in that way, it's nice too.
So just from kind of a closure standpoint, you get married. Mm-hmm. You're end of your sophomore year, beginning of your junior year at BYU.
Yeah.
And you guys get married in the temple. Mm-hmm. And at that point,
actually, my first mission president had been our sealer, so it was a very special wedding.
Mm-hmm. And I'm guessing you both had an understanding that you were building your marriage on top of the gospel, mm-hmm. and that you were going to be staying on the train, as I like to say, and living the gospel not just till the end of your lives, but for eternity.
Yeah.
And the gospel is going to be an inextricable part of your marriage and your family going forward.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yep.
Yeah.
Can I say one an observation that I just think is so meaningful is just witnessing your journey from this place where you begin, and it's really a lot of showing up for others, really how you feel valued, loved, important, to your mission where you have kind of an experience of connecting to yourself for the first time in this way of being able to state what you're feeling in a vulnerable way, mm-hmm. And the process of that, and then the courage of actually standing your ground and being in that place and being able to say, I'm frustrated, or I'm all the way to you deciding to get married, you making this decision on your own, navigating all of that on your own. And then this sexuality piece of being able to really, that is a deeply self-reflective, connecting part. And to be able to kind of own that and advocate and work through that with another human being. And that's a journey. Like, wow, that's really amazing. Like, I really, can we just honor the journey of that? And up to this point,
Yeah,
it's worth honoring.
I really felt like, even just at that point in my life, I really felt like I had grown a lot.
Yeah.
And learned so much more about myself.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful to see.
Thank you.
And as it seems like one of the main themes of part one of your story is kind of underdevelopment of the self. I learned this term cultural appropriation, how sometimes people or religions or organizations can appropriate the culture of somebody else. But it was only recently that somebody introduced the idea of identity appropriation, where an organization or a system can kind of appropriate someone's identity and implant seed an identity that isn't authentic to the person, where the person ends up never reaching adulthood, never really even knowing their thoughts or feelings or preferences, let alone ever cultivating them. So I think that's a theme here, is kind of identity appropriation or a lack of self-knowledge around feelings and identity. That's a part of the theme, but also a theme of perfectionism, where you were like so many of us, the high performing, in it to win it, all in Mormon that creates a lot of amazing humans, but that also might explain a lot of the mental health issues that are prevalent within Utah and within Mormonism: anxiety, depression, prescription drug abuse, high levels of SSRI use, and even sometimes high rates of suicidality and or suicidal ideation. So I guess I want to close by saying, at this point where you get married, you you serve a mission, you reach in many ways the ideal for a 24-year-old Mormon young woman.
I was 22.
22? Like you did it. Okay, you weren't Sterling Scholar, but like everything else, you seminary graduate, faithful, graduate from high school, runner-up Sterling Scholar, valedictorian or co-valedictorian, BYU, returned-missionary, endowed, married in the temple. You kind of like checked all the main boxes.
I'd peaked.
You kind of peaked. How were you? Let's end by just sharing how you were feeling reaching that peak. Did you reach another point, like with graduating from high school, where maybe you weren't feeling inside what you thought, or were you in fact feeling like on cloud 9 when you hit that peak, or something else?
Yeah. Well, I was really feeling a lot of fulfillment from my marriage that I kind of hadn't really had that much in my life before. So that felt really, really good. But there was also a sense of like, what now? Which is maybe a bit of foreshadowing for part 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But I mean, it doesn't sound like you hit that point ready to break down, questioning whether you wanted to live, like really high levels of anxiety or depression to the point of it becoming perilous for you. It sounds like it was kind of working.
It was working. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I guess my plan was like, yeah, so we're married. We should probably like get signed up for like couples counseling because we're going to need it at some point. Everyone does. So let's just do it now. And I might as well keep going to the counseling center, because it's free. It's not any extra above tuition. So I'm just going to like keep working on my mental health and like keep helping myself be happy. But like, just keep doing what we're doing. It was like, we were doing it and we just got to keep doing it. And I was feeling really happy about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're kind of living the Mormon dream and it was working out for you.
Yeah.
What could possibly go wrong? Stay tuned. Stay tuned for part 2, right?
Yeah.
All right. All right. Well, that ends part 1 of our interview with Ali Christiansen. And thank you so much for being vulnerable about all of it, but especially around the issues of asexuality, gray sexuality, because I think this is an area of gross, harmful unawareness. And every time somebody's willing, there's no obligation, but every time someone's willing to be vulnerable and share, it leads to higher levels of awareness and education that can help others maybe not experience the same level of difficulty that their predecessors do or did. So thank you, Allie. Mm. Yeah. And Margie, thanks for being my co-pilot on this one. It's so great to have you.
Thank you, babe.
This would not be nearly as useful without you. So I love you.
Thanks.
All right. All right, everyone. So don't go away. Come right back for part 2, whether you're live streaming or just joining us on the feed later. Join us for part 2. We're going to find out what happened in this amazing marriage, what happened when Allie was kind of living the Mormon/BYU dream, what could go wrong. Join us for part 2, where we're going to be talking about having doubts at BYU, maybe even losing your faith at BYU, all while you're still climbing that ladder of high performance and perfectionism, and in your case, in the choral or vocal performance area, ultimately singing with the Mormon Tabernacle Choir and at the performing at the highest levels of BYU vocal performance, and even starting to do stuff for and with the church, right?
Yeah.
And what do you do when all that's happening? Your rise is happening while your faith is kind of declining. Is that right, Allie? All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you all soon for part 2. Come right back and join us.